Mr. Shapiro, I give you 4 Pinocchios for the crime of extreme omission, and I give you a 5th Pinocchio because I hate your dusty ass.
All right. First of all, I want to say we have Noah Kulwin in the building. Okay, I'm bringing him in right now. He's got some things that he wants to say about breaking the silence. He's gonna break his silence about breaking the silence. And secondly, I'm gonna run the 3-minute ad break right now at the top of the hour. Okay. Without further ado, here is Noah Kulwin, ladies and gentlemen, in the building. What's up, Noah?
What's up? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Hold on. Let me increase your volume a little bit more. Is there any way you can increase your volume on your side?
Yeah.
It's low. I don't know why.
All right. What about now?
Oh, it's perfect. Okay, it's good. I was explaining the importance of building a broad coalition and having people that you don't fully 100% agree with, as long as they are also moving the needle in the appropriate direction. A lot of the things that you hear on CNN are just like unconditional support for Israel and its bombing campaigns. They literally have like a permanent IDF spokesperson come on to contextualize whichever like new civilian target they've eviscerated with American weapons, usually, to just immediately go like, yeah, that's totally a valid target. That ambulance, Hamas babies, Hamas babies, you know? And so in the sea of that level of misinformation and propaganda, it's usually good to cut through that with someone who has a personal involvement in some of the atrocities, who has recognized his mistakes and is working to undo that to the best of his ability.
I mean, I would also though say that like you don't have to like. I think that like it's probably not like, especially Americans, like, like I don't know, like, there are probably people in your audience who come from a lot of different places, but for Americans, like it's like sort of like taking the attitude of like seeing like our people like growing and learning in the ways that like we want them to, or it's like with Israel, that's certainly the case, that like a rubric that you can apply for a lot of people, but like when a guy like him shows up and is, this, like speaking this frankly about it, I think one can kind of safely assume that, like, very broadly speaking, like he gets it. And whatever disagreements one may have about, like, a actual political resolution to, like the Israeli conflict, to the Israeli occupation and confiscation of Palestinian lands. To me, it's just like to get there, like, yeah, I mean, even to get there, like this is a guy this is exactly the kind of person you want at the table. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like pretty basically.
Ultimately, what a lot of people fail to consider is that while 10% of the population in South Africa was white, they also had to fight back at the end of the apartheid against their own government in order for there to be a permanent solution. So you need more than ever any kind of allies that you could have inside of Israel, no matter how unlikely it seems that will occur. You need people who get it, that live in Israel, that are Jewish themselves, that have maybe even served in the IDF. So like, I don't discount people if just because I don't like fully agree with them. Like he mentioned that he wants like a 2-state solution, for example. Like that's not a deal breaker.
Yeah, and I also I do think that there are people who are taking advantage of this moment, let's say, and like making a point of saying like I criticize what Israel's doing, but also but also, and let me tell you what I'm going to shove into this, but also about them damn Palestinians and Arabs. Like you got an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours.
Yeah, my favorite is the guys. I hate Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay, I hate him, but also we have to end Hamas. We have to eradicate Hamas, which is like, okay, so you don't really hate him. Like that's literally his. I hate him, but I also agree with him every step of the way on his treatment of Palestinians. There's varying degrees. There's varying degrees of this kind of sentiment that you hear from liberal Zionists. Like, I mean, I know Noah is the expert here on hearing this kind of sentiment. I'm sure way more than I have from people, because like liberal Zionists will usually tell me that I'm a Hamas supporter, but
Yeah. Well, I do think it's also now, it's interesting. Like I am gonna have to think of this month as kind of like a before and after, because I do know a lot of people who I would have put in like a liberal Zionist bucket, but who now are, I think, like pretty, like they're not super vocal necessarily on behalf of Palestine, but like they're pretty appalled by what Israel's doing. And like long term,
yeah,
they do not have a kind of relationship with Israel that, I'm trying to think of how to put it. They don't have a relationship with Israel, like they're not going to raise their kids to, go to Israel all the time that like previous generations of Jewish kids did. Like this stuff is, it's very, it has an impact. It really, really does. And so the people who are clinging to Israel in this moment are like, I think that a lot of them are operating from a place of, the family. They're bombarded with shit in the media, uh, and they're not necessarily true believers in, let's say, a couple months when the dust settles or something. If this, because I do believe that there is like a degree of, like a fever that is consuming many people and many world leaders right now that will break, and not just world leaders, obviously, just fucking everybody's everybody's getting fired here. Everybody's getting fired here.
yeah. I think like the American position so far has been pretty clear. They recognize that this is just simple bloodlust, revenge, and a possible permanent annexation of all territories. But there's no real clear goal in how to accomplish this. And yet they still offer unconditional support while simultaneously leaking to the media that they're like, oh, it's kind of weird that Israel has no idea what the fuck they're doing, while also telling Israel directly over and over again in closed door meetings to like use smaller bombs or to do a humanitarian pause so that like it dies down, like the negative sentiment. It's not necessarily immoral that you're doing ethnic cleansing. It's not necessarily immoral that you're doing an apartheid. You've maintained an apartheid state for 56 years or 75, but it also like just quiet down a little bit, because the PR is making it untenable for us to continue supporting you unconditionally in the way that we have, in the way that you're used to.
I do think that is what you're describing is really, it can be chalked up in so much measure to the just like complete, I mean, cowardice is the only word for it, that like is sort of guiding democratic policymaking here now that their Middle East strategy of the last few years has just kind of blown up. Because we know what the Trumpy Republican answer to this current situation is, and that would just be, like drop the nuke that Israeli minister mentioned. I think that in this case, what we're seeing now is, all right, well, what can we cobble together as a PR strategy? Because if we're not actually going to stop this thing while it's going on, we've got to come up with a story to tell about how we actually did try to do something. And humanitarian pause is like a fucking like Iannucci in the loop Veep level kind of like, oh, this is a thing that we're just going to say. And Israel will even deny that. But by saying humanitarian pause instead of ceasefire, that's how we know you're not a Hamas supporter. It's that you don't really fucking mean it. Like that is about the level at which, like, like we're not saying like, oh, we're too, like we're extracting some concessions. Like Israel says, like, okay, the M16s that you're sending us, we're not going to give those out to the racist guys who live on land that they stole from a Palestinian like last week, and that these settlers probably actually came from South Africa and converted to Judaism. Like a real thing that exists. Like, that's like we're getting like these tokens. Like everything that's happening is on the level of symbolism.
Some people ride or die for apartheids, okay, and you can't take that away from them. Like they don't give a fuck. They don't give a fuck in which direction. They just love the concept. They're like, they're doing.
Dude, I gotta tell you something I learned recently. Like this past weekend, it fucked me up. So you saw the clip going around of that settler with a really unfortunate name, right?
Oh, Vile Shlomo.
Yeah. So his last name is Vile, and I know somebody who knows him. And he and his family, they live, they're converts, and to Judaism, which, like, to be clear, does not bother me, but it is like notable and very funny and lends credence to the cliche zeal of a convert when you become a convert and, like, you know, become an Israeli settler after like graduating from Chabad or whatever. And they were like super into environment, like they were like my friend jokingly called them like eco-fash, like they were hyper green organic type people, but that wasn't enough for them. So now they're settler. Now they're vile Shlomo in the West Bank in like one of the horrible settlements in, like, I think like Gush Katif. But yeah, it's bad. It's very bad. But yeah, that's some reporting for you from my
Thank you.
sources in the Chicago ultra orthodox community.
I'm happy to learn more about Shlomo Vile and what he's been up to. Someone in the chat said, "Did J.K. Rowling name him?" It's like it's a little, you know. I disavow Noah laughing at that. Okay, I think it's unacceptable. But all right, so let's move on from this because you and I were tackling some misinformation that has been.
There was so much misinformation that we were going at like 30 seconds an hour.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro is the king of doing a barrage of misinformation when it comes to every issue, and of course, Israel Palestine is no different.
Okay.
So last time around, I think we like left it basically around this point in 9 minutes, at the 9-minute mark, where he had skipped over the Nakba and did the classic, like, this is you know, all the Arab nations in the surrounding region attacked Israel, and that's why they had to ethnically displace every Palestinian they could by doing incredibly vile, brutal things.
Well, and also, like, let's be clear, that were planned well in advance.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they met weekly, you know, they got together to say, like, all right, you know, when the time comes, here's how we're going to go about it. David Ben-Gurion, you know, was all for it. Like, it's, yeah, you know, Mr. Shapiro, I give you 3 Pinocchios. I give you 4 Pinocchios for the crime of extreme omission, and I give you a 5th Pinocchio because I hate your dusty ass.
Yeah, so one other note there, I think, is always to, like, tie this back to the anti-Semitism of Europe, to make it seem as though the Arabs living there were not proven by history, by the way, for having this perspective. And it was simply just, like, anti-Semitism because they like similar to pogroms that occurred in Europe, like likening the skepticisms that Arab nationals had in Palestine to not getting assurances met by the colonial occupation of the British Empire at the time, to just doing pogroms against Jewish people because you thought they were, like, because you believe in blood libel or whatever, is ridiculous in my opinion. Were there anti-Semitic people? Of course. But their major motivation was not to, like, kill every Jewish person. Their major motivation at that point was...
And also, like, let's be clear, if their motivation was to kill every Jewish person, then they did a terrible fucking job of even, like, going about that. Like, it was... These were not... Like, these armies sucked, man. Like, the Arabs were... Like, this is why, like, according to one British colonial official who was present in 48, he called it... And this was the guy who supported what was going on, essentially. It was called the phony war. You know, there's just no, like, to call it like an independence war. Like, there was a cost to Israel in terms of loss of life because there was conflict, sure, but, like,
it's
essentially
6,000 to 15,000 over the that's the sum total, I think.
Okay, well, you know, that's villages don't displace themselves. Yella, you know, let's go.
Yeah, 16. Sorry, that's like deaths though. Like 6,000 deaths on the side of Zionists, in comparison to the 15,000 deaths on the side of villagers and Arab villagers. The reason why I say Zionists in that regard is because they had a semblance of a well-trained militia force going up against fucking villagers that had no guns. They were disarmed by the British.
Or they had like there's like a bunch of I saw this interview in the Al Jazeera Nakba doc where this guy was like, we had 1 rifle and 2 bullets, and we had to share that like it was a fucking Grandpa Simpson story. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, it was extremely depressing, and also quite moving.
It's ridiculous that he just like skips. I mean, it's not ridiculous. I understand why he just omits key details here because it would make a situation look worse. But let's
after World War II.
So he fast forwards through that brutal process. I believe we covered it enough, like Deir Yassin, Ventura, and many other massacres that occurred. And he went into 1947 and saying that the British mandate is still...
The British mandate is limiting the amount of Jewish immigration into British Mandate Palestine because they're attempting to keep this conflict between the Jews and the Arabs simmering at a lower level. Okay, 1947, there's a UN partition plan because now the British mandate in Palestine, they want to end it. They want to withdraw.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not even sharing my screen with you, so you don't even know where the fuck we're at. Hold on.
I mean, I'm watching the stream, but I just realized I can't hear.
It's not. Yeah, here you go. There it is. So you can watch along in real time. I apologize.
They don't want to be there anymore. So the UN says, okay, we're going to vote on a partition plan. It retains Jerusalem as internationally governed. Okay, so it would not have been Jewish territory or Arab territory. It would have been internationally governed. It's just this fragmented, ridiculous state. Okay, the state for the...
I like that he's shitting on the partition plan himself before saying, like, the Arabs were so stupid for saying no to this. Dude, his thirst for that territory is so ridiculous, dude. He's pre-shitting on it by saying, like, this partition plan, which gave 55% of this territory to a newly settled, as a part of a colonial project, newly settled 33% population, only 6% Jewish population before this, at this point.
Also, it gives all the agricultural production to the place, to the Jews, and you know, where all the Arab labor lives elsewhere. Yeah, it's exactly, you know, it's exactly. That's what else. I'm curious what he does with all these amazing props, though. You know, the geniuses at the Daily Wire have done it again.
A little bit of a slice of the coastal area here, and then the Negev desert down here. The Jews are like, give us whatever you got, right? Whatever you're going to give us, we will take. The Arabs instead decided...
By the way, at this point,
The Arabs.
Yeah, at this point, for the record, it is already defined and established that there is a plan that will be set in motion when British forces have like permanently removed themselves. This plan has already started at this point. Like there's already clashes, I guess, if you want to call it that, occurring in Arab villages. Arabs are fighting back. The Palestinians there are fighting back in some ways. But ultimately, they cannot withstand an actually trained militia force or even like terrorist forces like Lehi or the Irgun brigades and also Haganah, right? Truly asymmetrical violence is about to occur. They got guns coming in from illicit weapons that they've been able to sneak in. They have fucking tanks, armored personnel carriers. Like they have British weapons. They have British police training. It's not in any way, shape, or form happening as a random accident or as a happy accident. There are espionage. There's already espionage happening where some Zionist brigades are specifically tasked with going into Arab villages and making sure that they know what the population looks like, how many weapons they have, if they even have any fucking weapons at all, right? I mean, this is all also documented from firsthand account, firsthand testimony from people who are still alive, as a matter of fact. Like they were absolutely planning to do the Nakba, Plan Dalit, right? I mean, that's the only information. Some of the very few documented information that we have that has been declassified. So that's the intent.
They're going to launch a bunch of low-level conflicts. So there's this kind of low-level, quiet war that's going on for about a year with Arabs attacking Jewish settlements and attempting to kill Jews and Jews attempting to defend themselves. May 14th, 1948, the British mandate officially ends. Israel declares its independence. Right? This is Yom HaAtzmaut, or as the Arabs like to call it, the Nakba. Right? They call it a disaster that Israel was established. The leader of Israel at this time is David.
That's insane, dude. They call it a disaster that Israel was established because they're like, he's making it seem like Arabs are just player haters.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, oh man, sore fucking losers, man.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Here, Plan Dalet was a Zionist military plan executed in the civil war phase of the 1948 Palestine War, the conquest of the territory of mandatory Palestine in preparation for the establishment of a Jewish state. The plan was requested by Jewish agency leader and later first Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, and developed by the Haganah and finalized on March 10th, 1948. Okay? Unfortunately, a lot of this information is still classified. Some of it has been reclassified, as a matter of fact, after it got declassified. Originally, in Israel, there is a 50-year status for information that you can keep classified. Some of these documents that were declassified is the reason why there was a new wave of Israeli historians that looked through David Ben-Gurion's own personal journals, like Ilan Pape and others, that were able to come to the conclusion that this was facilitated as an act of ethnic cleansing that was carefully planned and conducted. Since then, there's also veterans that have engaged in information gathering of Arab villages before attacking said Arab villages that have come out and openly stated that the vile actions that some members that comprised later of the Israeli Defense Forces, the brutality in their actions, and also how coordinated and executed this was. So anyone that tells you that this like materialized out of a bunch of Arabs like hating Jews and trying to kill Jews or whatever is fucking lying. Okay, just wanted to give a little background on this because it's important to note.
David Ben-Gurion. Ben-Gurion is no right-winger. He's no hardcore right-winger. Ben-Gurion was a labor socialist. Ben-Gurion was very much in favor of a wide variety of negotiations. He was quite anti-religious in sort of his own persona.
All right, just pause it here.
Yeah.
Ben is just like going on a non sequitur here. The thing about Ben-Gurion that's kind of relevant to like, was he a good guy or a bad guy, or did he do bad things as it relates to 48, or that he was the lead driving political force, and he exerted authority over the people who would later become, when the state was created, the Israeli military. And throughout the 1930s and then in the 40s, he had ordered repeatedly to say, like to basically create and synthesize and develop plans for essentially, taking over all the land. And, like was he a labor socialist? Did he do yoga? Was he a funny man? It's like, sure. But like Ben Shapiro, what does he give a fuck about? Like, well, he understood the place of the religious people, da-da-da-da-da. And it's like, yeah, that's what you care about, because you care about like your specific narrow, lame ass interests, as opposed to like, anything else. Like it's it's like, just another bit of misdirection.
Yeah, Ben loves socialism when that socialism leads to wiping out a shit ton of Palestinians from their ancestral homelands. Sorry, I gotta read this real quick. These operations can be carried out in the following manner: either by destroying villages, by setting fire to them, by blowing them up, and by planting mines in their debris, and especially out of those population centers which are difficult to control continuously, or by mounting combing and control operations according to the following guidelines: encirclements of the villages, conducting a search inside them. In case of resistance, the armed forces must be wiped out and the population expelled outside of borders of state. Ben-Gurion himself, writing to his son in 1937, appeared convinced that this was the only course of action open to Zionism. The Arabs will have to go, but one needs an opportune moment to make it happen, such a war. I believe this is the contested letter that everybody yells at Ilan Pape over and claims that this is a mistranslation, even though I think Benny Morris himself also originally read this as an act of ethnic cleansing, like as a description of a necessity for ethnic cleansing, right?
And also Ben-Gurion is he's very famously but quite blunt, and in this case he may not have literally meant it as like the Arabs will have to, like at the time that he wrote it, he may not have meant like literally. Had you asked him like, do you mean to kick out all the Arabs, he would have been no, I was being hyperbolic. I think it's a great example of how when you look at something historically and you're trying to get a sense of, well, how does something really bad happen? How do you explain that people have the nerves and the determination to go through with it? A lot of it is to say, well, he expressed this idea quite forcefully at this one point in time with an intimate, with his son. And that is, it's I think like that's to me a very strong argument in favor of its provenance, because like he's not, it's not like some letter claiming, to like a general being like, now please prepare the secret plans for the expulsion of all Arabs from their ancestral lands, blah blah blah. Like that's, I mean, they eventually that's what it becomes, but like
Yeah.
he wasn't. It wasn't. There is something to this that I think is kind of interesting, just to look at it, on an episodic level.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. I had Chipotle before.
That's the reason why I showed Plandallet specifically, because like there's still controversy on the intent, but part of the reason why, at least according to Jan Pape, his assertion is that it's a blueprint for ethnic cleansing because it spelled it out clearly and unambiguously. The Palestinians had to go. The aim of the plan was, in fact, the destruction of both rural and urban areas of Palestine. Not that it fucking matters ultimately, because that's what happened, right? Like, which is what you're saying, regardless of what kind of cheery language they use.
And that's exactly it. Like, there's a very and it's also really rare that you get, I think. Like in general, I think that Israelis had kind of, in many respects, kind of like many of them, it's a kind of schizoid position, because on the one hand, they're proud they did it, and goddamn you for even asking. But on the other hand, we would never do such things. How could you accuse us of being Nazis? Don't you know we suffered the Holocaust? And
yeah.
I think that there is, like that's negative Tao, like that bad. It's a contradiction. That kind of, to me, like what these documents kind of show is that actually it's neither. You did it, and it wasn't with this, to me, the thing is about like how bloodthirsty and how crazy it was. It's that actually when we see how it evolved as a plan, it's that it was like pretty terrifyingly banal. That this was a far more institutionalized version of the form of terror that groups like Lehi and the Stern Gang had meted out over the years before.
Yeah. What's really
I see somebody in chat saying that it's not schizoid. However, I'm using the Alinskyite conception of schizoid, which is about holding two opposite ideals together, not a literal one. So you have to be nice to me.
Thank you for owning that, chatter. What I was going to say is, the more I read about the Nakba, the more I recognized how similar the tactics have been, both in doing this kind of ethnic displacement, which I think is inherently violent and of course requires a tremendous amount of violence, but also defending it and justifying it. Like the concept of human shields, or if we wanted to, we could wipe them all out, but we're not. So how can you say we're ethnic cleansing? Is quite literally the exact same defensive posture against the Nakba at the time, or at least like in contemporary analysis of the Nakba. And that's precisely what people say now about Gaza, where it's like, oh, if Israel wanted to, they could just kill all the Palestinians. Like, they're simply just killing enough Palestinians so the rest of them cannot withstand the brutality and want to fucking leave.
I mean, what they're psyching themselves up for, like the long-term goal is like clearly what they can't get, like their white whale, is that they cannot find a way to get the Palestinians in Gaza, even out of Gaza. And they want to do the same for the West Bank, of course. Like they want to depopulate these areas of Palestinians and, send them to Egypt. I guarantee you there's somebody in the Israeli government whose job is to figure out how to take the idea of Neom and make it somewhere in fucking Egypt where you could just stick a bunch of Palestinians. Like they want to do that. Why? I mean, there's like right-wing Israeli memes I've seen about like, imagining like what beachfront development in Gaza could look like. And I know that there's been a lot of conversation about the natural gas fields, but like until there's actual reporting that, establishes more about the intent of people, I kind of have to discount a lot of that stuff outside of it being interesting. But like all of which is just to say that like there is there are people who do have designs of Gaza as a place for future Jewish settlement and development, because like as Israelis and Hasbara people are always fond of saying, Israel's a very small country. It's the size of New Jersey. It's the size of a postage stamp or whatever the fuck. A bunch of beachfront land opening up would be really, really nice.
Israel's the most small being country, I think.
It's in spirit and physically and in definitely in bravery.
They're doing
considering
they're doing small bean ethnic cleansing. Let him.
Yeah,
let
like
him have
it's
it.
just they're like literally just like launching missiles and like going in with remote control armor.
All right, let's keep it going.
He understood the
Let's do
necessity
it.
of there being a Jewish state. In their founding documents, they ask the Arabs to stay. If you read the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel, they explicitly say, we want to be a state
because
for all of our
everybody here
citizens.
speaks Hebrew,
Yes, we're
right? Yeah, you guys got that?
I mean, how could he? Ben Shapiro's not known to lie. I'm sure he, in very good faith, just showed.
I mean, he's
the
like, yeah,
document.
Arabs, Palestinians who we didn't displace and who happen to be the ones left inside, you know, the borders of Israel. You have equal rights. Enjoy, however, basically having like 60% or whatever the fucking number is of the net worth of Jewish citizens.
But they didn't. That's the other part. This fucking son of a bitch is lying. They didn't even have equal rights until 1967, and they never had equal rights even after 1967. Like,
because they don't grant it, because like the Israeli Constitution is dog shit and it doesn't even have rights. It just has like 5 principles that are basically a guideline, and the rest is like case precedent, which is why the Supreme Court is so important.
yeah. And anyone who tells you that like Israel's a democracy or whatever, it's never been a democracy. Pre-1967, Palestinian citizens of Israel are not granted the same rights. They do not have the same court system. They are controlled by the military government in a similar capacity to the Palestinians living in the West Bank right now. So the idea that like these guys were given equal rights is a fucking lie. It is a complete lie. All right. Let's continue.
Jewish state, but we want Arabs to stay. We want them to become citizens. Instead,
No, they don't.
all of the surrounding
No,
Arab
you
countries
don't.
declare war. Israel is surrounded on every side by hostile states.
Yeah, I wonder why that happened. That's crazy. They've pushed 700,000 Palestinians out of their fucking homes. Why wouldn't people go, what the fuck, dog? I mean, they sent them everywhere. Like, yeah, of course.
Every single side, right? So you got Lebanon up north, you got Syria here, you got Jordan, you got Saudi Arabia, you got Egypt down here. And then there are a bunch of far-flung states that are also getting involved, right? Morocco was part of the 1948 war. You have a bunch of states that have decided they are going to invade and they are going to destroy Israel. Like they're just going to strangle it in the crib. And they're openly saying this. And not only are they openly saying this, they're telling the Arabs who are living in the Jewish areas, get out and get out of the way so our armies can come in and we can wipe the state off the map. Well, that's not how it ends up, right? The way that it ends up is that the Jews end up basically retaining pretty much everything that's on this map, with the exception of the old city of Jerusalem, right? So Jerusalem ends up basically split down the middle.
This argument is so ridiculous because, like, okay, these civilian Arab villagers leave. Let's say Ben is right, and all of these fucking countries are, like, totally unjustifiably, in a very virulently anti-Semitic way going, oh, we hate Jewish people because, like, we now believe whatever the fuck the Nazis were saying about Jewish people, and not because, like, what the fuck, you're killing. I lost you, by the way.
No, I turned off my camera for a second. I just have to grab something.
Okay. And they're just like, oh yeah, we hate Jewish people or whatever. Even if that is the case, okay, well, these civilians fucking left, and then they were denied a right to return. So even from his own ahistorical approach to the matter, that he's trying to greatly massage the truth to benefit Israel, to make Israel look like a small bean nation. Okay, that it's totally fucked up the way that Israel's being mistreated. Why the fuck can't civilians return to their homes then, Ben? I don't understand. How can you make the assertion while simultaneously holding on to the position that, like, well, all the Palestinians that stayed there had equal rights? Wrong. That wasn't even true. But, like, why? Why are they not allowed to return to their homes then? 700,000 Palestinians. Interesting.
Jerusalem is not controlled by the Jews at this point. The Temple Mount is still controlled by the Jordanians. The way that people speak about this particular period is as if there was a Palestinian state at this point. There was not. By 1964, the Arab states have decided that they need almost a propaganda effort here. So they create the Palestine Liberation Organization. The Palestine Liberation Organization...
Before we do that, hold on. Before 1964, can I just say something?
Yes.
Don't you love when Ben goes, all Arabs were attacking Israel? But when he wants to specify that there's no Palestinian state, he goes, Jordanians. Jordanians were controlling the West Bank, and Jordanians were technically in control of occupied Jerusalem. It's like really interesting how he has the capacity to swap from this like united Arab front and you know, these are all Palestinians. They're actually the crimes of Palestinians themselves, to Jordan was occupying Jerusalem. Interesting.
I mean, this is where he like had, it's part of it is just, it's just like a bunch of like oddly shaped facts that don't fit together that he just like, stacks up into piles of shit.
Yeah. Why do you want me to pause here?
Just because like the PLO wasn't just like stitched together by the Arab governments in this way. Like I just wanted to point that out. Like it's just kind of a unpleasant framing, and one that largely has, it also ignores that like this was about like centralizing existing strands of struggle, particularly because of pan-Arabism as the rising force in the 1960s. Because, one of the things that Ben skips over here is the 1956 Suez Crisis, which was actually the inciting incident, in a lot of ways that led to the creation of the modern day Israel lobby. Because, the Israelis and the French and the British thought that they could get one over on Egypt. They made a play and it went bad. And Eisenhower said, "What the fuck? No, 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 no. You don't do that. If you do that, we're going to fucking like rake you over the coals. So cut it out." And they do. And I think that there is a like, kind of interesting jump, that part of why he has to jump to this part of the story is because he can't, like Israel is not it's again one of these paradoxes. Like Israel is very powerful. It's an amazing country. It chooses its own destiny, but also like it has no responsibility for strategic boo-boos. And in the case of Suez, this was for a period when like Israel is fighting to expand its territory, to do even more ethnic cleansing. In fact, the other big incident that leads to the creation of the modern day Israel lobby is the Kibbutz massacre, which is, what year is that? Kibbutz, which is 53. Sorry, so that was before. And that was under Ariel Sharon, who you will be hearing about later from Ben, by the way. So keep this in mind.
Yeah.
So
in a positive way.
Yes, it's really disturbing. But this incident led to the creation of what's now called the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. It was initially created as a way to help launder, like a sense of Jewish community consensus around defending Israel. And it worked. There's it's a very, this is a horrible episode. But the Eisenhower administration, although it was not nearly as invested in defending everything Israel did as we are today. Israel was, of course, much weaker. But as 56 would sort of demonstrate. But yeah, that's why he, Ben, for his story, his narrative to make sense, he has to jump to 64 because he basically has to say, well, there are no such things as Palestinians. And so instead, all of the Arab nations got together like villains in the X-Men. And they put together this group, the PLO, and then they, went to kill, the PLO, which is like Spectre from Bond. Now they run the that's his story, is that like the Palestinians just like chose the path of evil. And so that's the only way that story makes sense, though, is that like if you ignore, the things that, let's say, like Palestinian terrorism as a tactic in the 60s and 70s internationally evolved from. Like it was in response to, let's say, the murder of 70 people, mostly women and children, in occupied territory.
Yeah. And for the record, in this duration, before we even get to the 60s, for like the first decade, the number of Palestinian civilians that are being ruthlessly slaughtered by the standing military of Israel at this point are being slaughtered not because they want to do acts of terror, but simply for the crime of like going back to their own fucking ranches and shit to like try to get as much food as they possibly can, going back to their own farmlands. And I mean,
this is why like the keys are such a major symbol of Palestinian liberation, because, people left with their keys because they thought they were going to be going right home. So 5 years later, it's like people think like, well, what if because this is also, by the way, very early in the days of the administration of Israeli occupation. It was not nearly as perfected of an art yet. And so, I mean, it was a more, I think we still don't know a lot about it, but I believe that the 1950s were, Yeah, there was a degree of violence, state violence, not unlike what we see today, that was being meted out. It was just like both at once more catastrophic, like it was at once more scandalous and also that much more secretive. And the news traveled slowly then, and information wars were waged differently.
Yeah. What do you say to Inan Pape's assertion that at the time Western journalists felt conflicted about showcasing the brutality of the Nakba? And even like the Red Crescent, or not the Red Crescent, Red Cross, due to like their own personal involvement in the Holocaust, like taking Nazi propaganda and just like repeating it uncritically about the concentration camps, for example, and that this was like a scar and a stain, so that they felt conflicted about like adequately reporting what Zionist brigades were doing and how Israel came to be, despite the fact that like there was actual information coming into the United States and into the Western world about these atrocities, and yet there was not a lot of coverage at the time. I don't know.
I need to reread that part of Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine about like the specific part of like, was the Holocaust looming large in their minds? I do agree with the fact that like the Western press, like hesitated. They pulled many punches in terms of their description of Israel. But to me, I've always chalked that more up based on my own observations and readings due to twofold ideological agreement with the Zionist movement and also due to geostrategic implications, which were that, the first of which was Israel, we were not on the side of the Arabs in that. And so it was not in the interest of Western and English language press to play up the crimes committed against them. So that's thing one. And then, as far as Zionism goes, I mean, I'm pretty sure there still is a portrait of Herzl in the, editorial board room of the New York Times. I think that a lot of these, major mainstream publications, for a wide variety of reasons, were really, they believed in a Jewish nation state. And so, if they're not seeing a mass, consider what a journalist in a war zone, right? Like put yourself in their feet. Some of them are probably seeing some hairy stuff for sure. But I also think that they're also like at a remove, like they are, not dissimilar to journalists today. And if their instinct is not to go and fight to figure out what's going to happen, if the Israeli military or Israeli soldiers say, here's what happened, etc., it exerts a tremendous pull.
This is the take from Pape, the text from Pape. Representatives of Western media, including a New York Times reporter, were still filing stories about individual villages, although the public interest in their fate was by this time diminishing. In any case, Western readers were never given the full picture of events. Furthermore, it seems that none of the foreign correspondents dared openly to criticize the actions of the Jewish nation just 3 years after the Holocaust, is what he said. But I agree with you. I think it's more so it always is a strategic interest. There's always a materialist analysis as to how you can utilize a state at this point comprised of Westerners from their perspective that have gone there, that are aligned, whose existence you can use as a destabilizing force against all of the other Arab nations that might, do tricky things like like nationalizing the Suez Canal, right? Like this is a means of control more than anything else. All right, let's continue. Now, 1964, the founding of the PLO, which Ben has called Yasser Arafat an arch terrorist before in other videos. Like he's the apex of terrorism. Like he's the worst terrorist of all time.
Is a terrorist group. It explicitly calls for the destruction of Israel. Now you will note, at this point, Israel does not control any of this.
That's not
or
even
any
true.
Of this. So when they say Palestine Liberation Organization, they mean this whole thing, right? That whole thing is supposed to go away because Israel doesn't even control that at that point. And they're not calling for Palestine to be liberated from Jordan or from Egypt. They're calling for the complete destruction of the state of Israel. Okay, so in 1967, the Arabs mobilized for all-out war. And this includes Egypt, it includes Jordan, it includes Saudi, it includes Syria. This is going to be the big war where they finally get rid of this nascent Jewish state that is less than 20 years old.
Thank God Israel knew ahead of time and was able to wipe out 90% of the air force of the Egyptian military by doing a preemptive first strike against the mobilizing Arab nations in the surrounding regions. Thank God.
right? And this is just less than 3 decades after the Holocaust. And Israel instead launches a preemptive war. They see this coming. They destroy the entire Egyptian Air Force on the ground. And in 6 days, they proceed.
Wait, okay. So this doesn't call into question at all in the hearts and minds of the watchers that's like not interesting at all. It's a preemptive self-defense first strike on the entirety of the Air Force of their enemies. It's really interesting. Japan launched a preemptive first strike against the United States of America by doing Pearl Harbor. That's what it was.
I mean, it is also like pretty crazy because, like, you know, they got so. I mean, part of that really was like, you know, Nasser fucking blew it. But it is like, to me, kind of jarring just how, like, it's like then you know what comes next is that, like, oh yeah, Israel had a whoopsie and fell into expanding its territory by like a third.
Yeah.
They had like oh, I hit my knee and now I have the Sinai and the Golan. Like, I don't get it.
I love that because then it follows with Israel doesn't love taking extra territory. How dare you say that? They gave back the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. Thanks, man. And Golan Heights, they have to maintain for security.
Well, that's where, I mean, but the thing is like what it really is, of course, is like, and they, you know, you proceed to see this over the following years, is that the way they see it, at least at this point in time, is that, you know, the Labor and Mapai leadership see these as, at worst, they are bargaining chips. You return them in exchange for something later, as you know, as is what happens with Egypt. But they also, you know, are war spoils. They are a thing to point to give your regime legitimacy. And this is also, by the way, like, Israel during these years, you know, is contending with many of, you know, before we had the shocks of the 1970s, there was a major inflation. And so Israel was also dealing with, you know, some major domestic economic struggles at this time. And the hegemonic, like, ruling class within Israel was going through a, you know, I mean, it was not necessarily in a position to continue lasting. And I believe pretty strongly, and I think the, you know, historical work has shown, there's a book called The Global Political Economy of Israel that talks about this stuff pretty well. But I think that the idea is that, like, yeah, like, these wars also had like a kind of, and acquiring all this territory, the settler movement didn't exist at that time, but you sort of see the beginnings of how a way of responding to like economic dislocation within the Israeli system by, like, you know, acquiring lots of land.
That is the most American manifest destiny, constant expansion of the fucking West ass attitude of all time. No wonder we fucking love Israel so goddamn much.
And it's like, you know, like, it's literally the same thing. Like, God is telling you it's tight. And yes. How do you know God is telling you it's tight? Like, well, you know, I mean, this is where it's like why, you know, labor Zionists, for example, they cared so much about like archaeology. There's a very famous Israeli general named Yigal Yadin, who is also an archaeologist, and like, you know, there's a very like rationalist, humanist kind of way that a lot of those people also sought to, like, you know, make this kind of blood and soil sort of manifest destiny kind of thing.
Yes, in identical ways. Like, this part, I'm not saying it's the same. I'm not saying that this is like, I'm not trivializing the Holocaust. My name is not Benjamin Netanyahu. I would never do that. Okay, but like, the exact same myth making that Nazis engaged in with identical means, maybe not like talking about Santa Claus or whatever the fuck, but like was also happening in the situation as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just
no.
Like,
I mean, and it's also there's a you know, the other thing that Israel's doing here is like, it's, you know, this is there's a few simultaneous things. Israel takes over the West Bank and administers a military occupation. And they start to do some incredible international legal maneuvering. The documentary, if to watch about like how Israel got away with all this legally, or at least to me, the most interesting one is this documentary, The Law in These Parts. I may have mentioned it on the show before, but it's about like how they set up the Israeli military courts. And I think that there is this kind of you can like, so it's like, yeah, like there's this war that's being described, but a lot of what the 6 Day War really is like Israel not like scoring some crazy victory, but you know, as for the purposes of our story, for the Israeli kind of Palestinian like you know like fight over this territory of land, it's Israel's swift assumption of control for the responsibility of the millions of people who live in the West Bank and in Gaza.
Yeah. All right, let's continue.
To take the Golan Heights, which is this area of Syria. Israel takes over the entire Sinai Desert, takes all of Judea and Samaria to the Jordan River, takes all of the Gaza Strip, takes control of the old city of Jerusalem. Right? They do all of this in 6 days, which is why it's considered a miracle by the state of Israel. I mean, it's an unbelievable military performance. So in 6 days...
Yeah, it's not a miracle. Don't call it a miracle, Ben. That does a disservice to miracles. Your conception was probably a miracle.
Are you saying he's Jesus?
No, I'm just saying that his dad probably had some of the weakest swimmers that humanity has ever known.
They take what was going to be the war for their destruction, and they proceed to expand their borders from this tiny thing to this, and all of this. Israel then proceeds to give up like all of it, right? So Israel keeps the Golan Heights because that's a military necessity. The UN calls for Israel.
Love that.
I love that. It's a military necessity. Let's not question that. Let's not question the fact that there are agricultural claims held by Arabs, and you know that also that there are like these gigantic communities and kinship networks stretched across 3 different borders that you just decide that, you know, one is going to be. I mean, it's really fucked up. And this is also, for what it's worth, like this is like a motif within a lot of Israeli cinema. There's that movie, The Syrian Bride, I'm pretty sure, that's like all about the, you know, like there's just a very, yeah, like I'm just very impressed at how quickly he moves past like, oh, security, that's not real. Sorry, security is the only thing that's real. Culture, land, people, they're all just Arabs.
Yeah.
Except when I need to use them as props.
Except for when he does this thing where he talks about like the Lebanese occupation and like how brutal it was to Palestinians. The only time he makes this the only time he distinguishes between Arabs is if he's like trying to shit on a specific group of Arabs that somehow make like Palestinians look bad. Where he'll be like, the Lebanese military killed more Palestinians at the time than the Israeli military did. And it's like, okay, but you don't have this, like, you think Arabs are a monolith. Like I guess it kind of is like, he treats it like a, this is an Islamic jihad missile that misfired. Only Jews get to kill. Arabs, they can't. Only Israelis. Anyway, I have to pee really bad. I'm going to play this.
Yeah. That's a good way to do it.
Israel to withdraw from occupied territories. Now, the language here matters if you care about the UN. I don't happen to care about the UN. I think it's a garbage organization. But if you do care about the UN, there's a resolution put forward by the UN Security Council. It calls for Israel to withdraw from occupied territories, not the occupied territories. Now, that makes a difference because if it said the occupied territories,
see,
presumably
all right, that's literally the level on which Ben and Zionists make the argument on this point.
It says
about
occupied
legal
territories, which
obligations.
means subject to negotiations.
It's just about whether or not there's
Arab
a
League
the
summit happens
in the text.
And they agree in Khartoum, Sudan, on the 3 no's. No peace, no recognition, no negotiations. And these are the 3 no's that are going to govern the Arabs all the way through. Basically until now, until the Abraham Accords. These were the 3 no's that mattered. And this is all the way in 1967. So whenever people talk about there needs to be a 2-state solution, why couldn't they have come to an agreement? Because literally one side said there will be no peace, no recognition, and no negotiations. One side has accepted every single peace deal provided to it to this point in time. And one side has said we will not accept any peace deal. And yet somehow there's a moral equivalency between the 2 sides. Explain that one. Okay, 73, holiest day of the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur. Everybody is fasting, everybody is praying, and a surprise attack is launched on the state of Israel. The prime minister is Golda Meir. She gets caught completely by surprise. They were warned, and they didn't take it seriously. Israel suffers extraordinary casualties in the 73 Yom Kippur War. And then once again, maintains or expands its borders a little.
Is there anything you wanted to pause and go back to? Or
just hit pause one. There's like, he like talks about the Khartoum resolution and the 3 no's. I want, you know, like on first blush, like if somebody ever tells you that there's like there was this law that they passed and that's why they couldn't make peace for 50 years or whatever the fuck, like that's not real. Like that's they're making up a reason, prima facie. Second thing though is that the 3 no's, I wanted to check if Wikipedia still has it, and it does. Avi Shlaim has like actually like a really good concise explanation of why it's like, you know, like it's not really a fair interpretation of them, because what they're really about, it's in the next part. It's like
the 3 no's: no peace with Israel, no negotiation with Israel, no recognition of Israel.
But it's like what it's actually saying, and this is, you know, like and Avi Shlaim's argument I think is correct, because again, if we're judging by how these parties acted then the three no's only make sense if you mean no peace to mean no simple peace treaty, like meaning that we want a final resolution with this, no direct negotiation, meaning that we'll continue to talk to them through intermediaries, which they've always done, and no recognition of Israel. I mean, yeah, they're not going to recognize it as an entity right now, and that's, I mean, I think that the like recognizing the Israeli force of law in 1967 was also just like a much more live question. Like, you know, it is a cliche to invoke when you don't want to seriously discuss why the Arab world took such a hard line against even the seeming existence of Israel. And that has to do with, again, you know, like the occupation and the fact that like the Israelis are at all times, even at this point, you know, like now, I mean, both the occupation and also trying to deny that there was a Nakba, trying to deny that there is any crime that they actually have to pay for from 1948 and so forth.
Well, you don't understand. They're small bean. They're doing small bean ethnic cleansing at that point. They're small bean. They're so tiny. They're like the size of New Jersey. And isn't it crazy, Noah, that Israel has never been in the wrong in any of these situations? I mean, what are the fucking odds, right?
I mean, it only happens. Well, have you noticed that the Bible is the same way? The Jews are never in the wrong. Have you considered that? Have you thought about that?
I'm just saying, it's just wild. What a crazy situation, you know? What a crazy situation that they're never.
Well, you know, Israel's ultimate small bean moment is coming up too.
Yeah. I love, yeah, Weeby's right. I love reading history books. It's so awesome that all the good guys have won every war and they've always done the right things. You know? It's crazy.
A little bit. 79, Camp David Accords. Finally, there's a breakthrough. Menachem Begin takes over as prime minister of Israel, a very right-wing prime minister. There were two major parties in Israel at this time, Likud and Labor. This is the first Likud prime minister. And one of the things that he does is he comes to a peace accord with Anwar Sadat, who is the nationalist leader of Egypt. And in those peace accords, Israel gives up the entire Sinai Desert. Israel gives up the entire thing to Egypt in return.
Pausing.
1 second. I just want to see something. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
One eternity later.
Basically, the thing that's kind of like not being made clear here as like, you know, what is Egypt doing in all this? Because Begin, in essence, what happened here is like Carter fucked up big time. The first was that he gave this huge immediate victory and, you know, sort of like to Begin and just empowered him. And Begin was a terrorist. Begin was a Jewish Klansman, essentially. The opening of his memoir is about Deir Yassin. And he's basically, you know, he's proud of it. And Sadat was in the process in the 1970s of basically figuring out, you know, like Egypt at that time was like the eminent power in the Arab world. Saudi Arabia was, you know, they were the custodians of Mecca, but they weren't and they had oil, but they weren't, you know, Egypt was the center of Arab civilization.
Their potential had not been realized by the British just yet.
And you know, they're super populous, etc. And under Nasser, they had been aligned, you know, they were not aligned, but they got support and were majorly supported by the Soviet Union, which continued in with Sadat. And so Sadat was sort of recruited, and you could view the 1979 peace accords as really not being about Israel much, but instead being a lot more about this effort to cultivate a new set of allies against the Soviet Union in the final phase of the Cold War. And that's like, we actually talk about that in Blowback. And as also the U.S. is, you know, 1979 is another year of like real energy crisis, and is about, you know, trying to demonstrate to the Arab world that the U.S. can, you know, is willing to structure support in a friendly way. And there's, you know, which is all this to say is that this is, you know, Israel was not making concessions for peace by giving up the Sinai. Israel bought its permanent peace with the Egyptian border as long as there is a U.S. friendly regime in control in the tradition of Sadat, because Sadat's legacy, his position is it's a story of continuity from Mubarak to Sisi with the Morsi interruption. And so, you know, that's like, you know, this isn't like an Israeli dub. This is an American L in that we ended up taking, we fund Egypt, and we have for decades, this basket case government that the IMF always has to bail out, and incredibly poor people, Egypt was a country of incredible promise. And then once it aligned with the US, it became way more unequal and really, really fucked up, and is now mainly buffeted by all of this like American aid, or supported by all this American aid. Yeah, it's a really it's really kind of sick and fucked up that we only really think of 79 and Camp David as this, Israeli diplomatic coup, when, it was a kind of Faustian bargain for peace. It meant that Israel and Egypt get to make peace, but literally it was to make sure oil could remain cheap and Palestinians could remain oppressed.
I love the framing of this as though this is like at the behest of Palestinians, like Israelis are being so kind, bringing this up in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict of this sort, when like Palestinian interests are not represented at this point. They're not represented for another 30 years. Like there's not even a Palestinian present at the table for a very long time. And the only reason why there is any Palestinian or ostensibly on the side of Palestinian voices at the table on the American side is a direct consequence of their own personal interest in the Gulf states, like you said correctly, about oil, and their own interest in like maintaining allegiance with the Gulf states at a time when like they seemingly give a fuck about Palestinians and haven't like fully reached this level of not giving a fuck about Palestinians yet. So that's that is, I think, important to also note, because it's always like this notion that like all Arabs are the same. They're a monolith. So of course, like when the Egyptian guy is making a deal, he's making it at the behest of all Arabs, and all Arabs include Palestinians. All Palestinians are Arabs, and all Arabs are Palestinian. Sorry, I'm burping.
Turn for basically a cold peace. Anwar Sadat is then assassinated. In 1982, the Jordanian monarchy is deeply afraid that the Palestine Liberation Organization is going to overthrow the monarchy. They expel the Palestinians. The Palestinians end up in Lebanon, tens of thousands of Palestinians. Palestinian terrorist groups begin firing rockets over into Israel from South Lebanon. In 19...
He's like, only we get to expel Palestinians.
Well, and also like Israel saw this and was like,
yeah. Well, he's about to mention what Israel did.
1982, Menachem Begin launches a war in Lebanon. Israel ends up basically going all the way up to the capital of Beirut and nearly occupying the entire country. And then...
Yeah. Again, the good guys, you see that?
They just can't stop. They're addicted to occupying. They just love it.
Dude, but they're always somehow doing it out of a national security concern, and I believe them.
Yeah, I mean, does Lebanon go from being like the most cosmopolitan Arab country in the region to becoming a permanent economic basket case driven by civil war? Sure. But them's the breaks, dog.
Yeah, it's just, it almost, man, it feels, but, at the end of the day, the most moral army had to do what it had to do. Like, for example, when they deployed, knowing full well that these were like some of the biggest psychopaths, they deployed Christian fascist militias into these Lebanese and Palestinian refugee camps.
And who oversaw that?
Well,
Ariel Sharon.
But it was so ruthless that that he had to, I guess, didn't he resign after that?
Yeah, he was I was about to say. So Sabra and Shatila, I mean, it's a good example of how, like, the Israeli domestic political conscience is kind of like, in the 80s, this other fascist comes into power, Shamir, and he's forced into what's called the rotation government. And there's essentially like this sort of prolonged period of like in the 80s of like some right-wing excess, but this, sort of general, strategic ambiguity that opens up. And this is sort of what is the prelude to both the First Intifada and later the Rabin opening that leads to Oslo. I think that like the way to think about it is that the Israeli right is, now feeling very emboldened to be like, well, listen, we've got these strategic opportunities, in southern Lebanon where the PLO is. We can go after our biggest enemy, the PLO. We can use our biggest Arab allies, the Christian Arabs, the Phalangist militias, and we can make sure that they're the ones in control of the Lebanese government, and then we'll go back. And, you know, it's a tale as old as time. You think you're going in to prop up a friendly government, and the next thing you know, you're there for literally 20 years. In Israel's case, 18 years, because they ultimately withdraw from Lebanon in 2000, which I don't believe. I don't remember if Ben mentions that.
They got too old.
I don't think he does
at that point.
But and they have this, like, you know, they've, like, over the course of the 80s, you've got that the occupation in the West Bank intensifies and resistance to it intensifies. And, you know, Syria is not able, you know, I mean, the other big thing is that Israel also, by 1979, the other thing that everybody learns about Israel is that it is a nuke because of the Vela incident, and then later because of a spy, Mordechai Vanunu. But and then Cy Hirsch wrote a book in the 90s, The Samson Option, about the Israeli nuclear program. And so there is, you know, like, there's I'm trying to just sort of give a broad sweep of policy, or something of a story rather than just like what is presented by Benny Shaps as this, like, you know, discombobulated set of like incidents where the Jews are in the right and the Arabs are in the wrong.
What's the name of the guy? Where the fuck is it? What's the name of the guy that's like still under?
Yeah, Vanunu.
The guy who's like still arrested, right?
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I think he converted to Christianity.
Vanunu Mordecai, and he just tweets all the time. It's so weird. It's like sad.
Well, it's very sad. I mean, because the government just denies him. Yeah, Mordecai Vanunu.
Yeah, Mordechai Vanunu, he tweets literally nonstop. No news yet, no freedom yet. Continue to wait for my freedom to get out.
Well, I guess once every month.
Yeah, it's very sad.
So, you know, 79 though is when
he said Happy New Year's. it's sad.
The other, so yeah, like there's this like increasingly aggressive security posture being adopted by the Israelis, and I mean, now we'll see how Mr. Shapiro. I'm curious where he takes the story from here.
Well, at least you know what I like looking at Shapiro's videos, because he doesn't even at any step of the way, he doesn't even try to do like any liberal Zionism. Like, he just straight up is like the most right wing guy that to exist at any given moment in Israel is the most righteous guy.
Yeah, and like, or the most violent, and you know, and Ariel Sharon is the name to remember because he was the defense minister who fell on his sword for Sabra and Shatila.
Yeah,
and he's also the guy who oversaw the Kibbutz massacre. So, you know, remember that name.
For those of you who don't know, chat, I've talked about Sabra and Shatila a lot, but basically they deploy the Phalangist militias into these are psychopathic Christian fascist terrorists that are purposely deployed into these neighborhoods. And they did so many atrocious acts. The only IDF presence at that point are on the outskirts of these refugee camps, these Lebanese neighborhoods, where they're waiting, and if any to make sure that no one can escape. So in the cover of the night, they go in and they slaughter, mercilessly slaughter all of these civilians, women, children. The story that you've heard commonly about the pregnant woman who has her child cut out of her while she's alive. That's from Sabra and Shatila.
Also, the movie Waltz with Bashir it's an Israeli movie. It tells the Israeli story, or an Israeli story. It's animated. I personally find it very moving still, and I think that it does give like a pretty straightforward representation of how Israelis he basically straight up says like, my parents were in the camps and I became a Nazi. How did this happen? That's the movie.
Yeah.
Growing under international pressure in what is considered sort of a disastrous war for the state of Israel. As always, whenever Israel withdraws from a territory, terrorist groups take over and then threaten Israel. This is the constant pattern. No matter the only time this has not happened is with regard to withdrawal from the Sinai Desert. 1987, the Intifada.
Yeah, there it is. He's just saying like Israel should permanently occupy Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, well, maybe not Egypt. All the time.
Also, like, by the way, you know what happened here? Hold on, I want to see. Oh, what's this? The year after Israel invades Lebanon, what happens? Hezbollah killed 241 U.S. military personnel at a Marine Corps barracks in Beirut.
Oh, yeah. True.
So it's not like also. So he's like, yeah, the terrorist attack stopped maybe against some Israelis, but who did get attacked? Fucking American soldiers. So this is also where it's like, yeah, he's just leaving out a lot of inconvenient facts.
Intifada breaks out. This is the Palestinians in the Judea and Samaria region. The reason that
okay, you tell me, maybe I'm wrong. Is he purposely saying Judea and Samaria as like a smug remark to be
no,
like,
it's a religious. I mean, it's a religious thing. It's I hate to say it because it sounds like I don't, I genuinely like. There are many people in my life whom I love who are very observant Jews, and when I say religious people or I talk about observant Jews, I really do not mean like everybody. Or anything, but like religious Zionists, which is a specific kind of designation. It's people who often they wear, men wear kippah day in, day out. They don't go out on Fridays and so on. They, they're basically, they hold all the right-wing positions of the ultra-Orthodox in Israel, except like they could hold a job in like the normal world. I think that it's a, it's a, when you say Judea and Samaria, it goes back to that map that I showed you on the last stream of just like the Bible and all the different little spots that, where he says, like he literally pulls it up, like that is what he means. Like Judea and Samaria, like, I'm sure you've heard of the phrase like a good Samaritan, like that refers to a fable from the Bible of somebody going, in Samaria. Samaria is, it's just, oh yeah, that's what they called it in the Bible. And I'm a religious Jew, so I should call it that. And so he's dressing up what is just a really hyper-nationalist claim about how he still views this land that is occupied by millions of Arabs as being a biblical land that, is, I mean, it's like by itself, is it that upsetting or whatever? Like, no, except for the fact that the only people who say it are people like him, which kind of tells you.
I only hear from settlers who, if you say West Bank, I say Judea and Samaria.
In Israeli, they don't say like in the common phrase that I hear, like, and that I use, and that most people I know use, you say is like I'm talking to a quote unquote normal Israeli, but like in the shtachim, which means the territories, because there's not that's how people actually have a relationship with it. They're occupied territories, and they are part of the occupying country. It's only if you have this like religious Yahoo buy-in that maybe you conceive of it as that.
I feel like talking about Istanbul and calling it Constantinople or something. That's the way I see it. Like a Greek person being like, exactly. Constantinople.
True.
Well, but another thing the reason why I get triggered by that is because I always hear like there's three things. One, calling Hamas, and the more you put the the more you're like, pro-Israel. The more like there's videos, people sent me videos of like Bernie Sanders in the past calling Hamas, and like now he's hitting the I don't know why, but his perspective.
Because in Hebrew, that's how you say it in Hebrew. Like that's the letter.
I
know, but it's just like, it's so fucking annoying though, because it's such a tell of just like, yeah, you don't talk to Arabs, you don't talk to Palestinians. Yeah. One just like, you just only hear is Hebrew, you just hear Hebrew, and so you say the Hamas.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other one is never saying Palestine or Palestinian, like saying that Palestinians are not people. Yeah. And then the other thing is like saying Judea and Samaria over and over again. Those are like in a lot of circumstances, like those are some of the telltale signs of the
other one in Hebrew. Like, the way you say Gaza is Aza, but it's because like there's like an sound in Hebrew. That's the like version of like the Hebrew version of the Arabic Ra. Yeah, that's the other one. Aza is Hebrew. So if you hear somebody say Aza Hamas, then contact your local Mossad and let them know somebody's gone missing.
I use the terms Judea and Samaria as they are more historically accurate. People call it the West Bank. Why? Because Jordan occupied it, and this is the West Bank of the Jordan River. So the only reason that it's referred to as the West Bank, which is really historically anomalous, right? It's on the east side of Israel, but it's on the West Bank of the Jordan. That's a holdover from the time when the Jordanians occupied this entire area. Again, no one cares that Jordan occupied quote-unquote Palestinian land or that Egypt occupied quote-unquote Palestinian land. They only care when Jews occupy historically Jewish land. That's when things start to get really
Because you make sure that they don't have freedom of movement or anything like that under Jewish occupation, blah, blah, blah. You don't
especially
have to
like
stop
with
it.
Egypt.
This is just so obvious.
With Egypt, like even Egypt at least gave them like some semblance of autonomy. You know what I mean? Like there was.
Of course, and the reason that they didn't give them any more than that was because the assumption from Palestinians and the Arabs as well was that they would be getting back all of the land, or at least have some negotiated solution whereby there would be equal right. Like there's just a
Nobody thought Israel could be so brutal for so long.
Exactly. Like exactly. Ugh.
Yeah, and also finally, really funny when he says that. Because I think he's saying it specifically to be like, all Arabs are the same. Like, oh, Palestinians, Palestinians don't care. Which, by the way, at this time, I think the Likud position for a brief moment around 1978 was literally to expel all of the Palestinians from the West Bank into Jordan and like give Jordan to the Palestinians. Like make Jordan the Palestinian state.
Yes. I mean, essentially, they also were like they had this idea of. I mean, really, like there is this belief that Israel has the right to everything from the Jordan to the Mediterranean, and that's in the Likud. That was in the Likud charter. And there's they've always how they're going to accomplish that, even if they're not vocalizing it so much as Likud these days, and that's a demand associated more vocally with the further right. It's, like what you could see is that desire expressed pretty consistently through policy over many, many, many years, and how the policy instrument or what the demands are, change over time. For example, like the West Bank settlement explosion does not happen until the 1990s in Oslo, in a different environment, In
1977, there were, I think, 7,000 settlers in the West Bank total.
Exactly. It was not like, so it's really, and in the 90s, it was a matter of like, it's really like, if you like, you could just, the chart is just breathtaking, but the thing that happens in the 80s is entrenched occupation. And then there's the first meaningful, and this is what he gets to. The first is what Ben's getting to now, like the 87, the first Intifada, which was, by the way, not just, in addition to being massive resistance and guerrilla operations against IDF forces in the West Bank and Gaza, also included exactly like general strikes and the withholding of labor in ways that later triggered the Israeli elite to start thinking about how they might reorient, the labor supply of their country.
Yeah.
Which explains why there's so many Thai and Filipino workers in Israel.
Oh, yes, 100%. This is also part of the reason why Noam Chomsky says that Israel is worse than an apartheid state in comparison to the South African apartheid, because the South African apartheid relied on a black labor in the country. They comprised 90% of the entire population, and the white white owning class at that point still needed a group of black people that they could subjugate and use as cheap labor. Israel decided maybe not Arabs. Let's go with somebody else. Well, I guess I would say South Africa tried that too. No, to some degree.
Well, I mean, they did. I think that it's with Israel though. In South Africa, just the numbers, the ratios were way different. In terms of population, the Bantu stuff, like what apartheid was just helpful in sort of like demarcating is like, one, there's a race, like there is a like a racialized hierarchy that in the case of Palestine is drawn from an ethnic association, Arab, but it is
an ethnic association that also is ridiculous because there's a shit ton of Arab Jews.
Exactly.
That's the most frustrating part about this conversation.
Well, it is like it's Arab Jews are also though like it's I think that it would like I would have to like Arab Jews are to many people like I think a lot of the people who would identify as such in Israel, for example, they would be really offended at the thought that they would have something in common with Palestinians, which is like, that's race. Like that right there, that's your problem. That's race. That's right there.
Exactly. Like, how does it not factor in? There's so many dumbasses looking at it from the outside that there is a massive population of Arabs that are Jewish that call themselves Jewish as a separate designation from the way Israel claims Palestinian citizens of Israel
And
are
also,
Arab.
if you watch like Fauda, the Netflix show about like the Israeli operators, like it literally begins with them like doing like brown face to go undercover. And these are people who it's like, my mother is from Tunisia, that's why I speak Arabic so good. And it's like, okay, and it's like, so and it's like a really caricature, like it's like any Arab person that's ever watched that show is like fucking like amazed that so many white people like take it so seriously, because the portrayal of Palestinian life and the portrayal of Arabs and how they talk in Arabic is just so beyond, to put it mildly. And I think that I mean, it's a real like, it drives me fucking crazy.
It's just, yeah, that's why they can't make these fake fucking PIJ Hamas phone interception conversations stick. Because they, at best, get a guy with like a thick Egyptian accent.
Well, and like the generations of people for whom it was actually like who could do that are dead, and they've been dead for decades. In fact, the most famous Israeli spy was a guy named Eli Cohen, and the Syrians hung him in the 50s. And he was able to go undercover. I think he posed as Argentinian, but like he was able to be undercover in the Arab world in a way that I think is just like has for some years now not been nearly as accessible to Israel for a lot of fairly obvious reasons. Concerning the fact that like how many the youngest person who was born in an an Arab country who now lives in Israel. Like, I mean, there are exceptions, sure, but like, there's not like a fresh supply of like Yemeni Jews from Sana who are coming to Israel and who can then be and who have like, all of the prerequisites for spy work, and then who can get, deposited somewhere else. Yeah, I mean, it's a very like,
it's their fucking insane racism that stopped them from being good spies in the Arab world. They were like personally so offended at like any kind of Arab culture that they can't even make good spies anymore in the Arab countries.
No, I mean, that's why they do like a lot of their advantages like surveillance, and they're really good at listening to Arabic. And I'm sure that like when they are able to listen in, that they get accurate intel and so forth, just like the American. That doesn't mean that they don't, of course, lie about it and so forth. If anything, it means that when they try to reproduce it, they fall prey to a lot of the same, if they're not able to like, arrange for somebody's mistress to get killed, then like they just rely on posting like, Fox News headlines or whatever. It's the same as Americans, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Bothered. Okay, so anyway, the Intifada breaks out in 1987. You get
fuck. I just unpaused, but I'm gonna pause again. Sorry. The first Intifada broke out in 1987 because first of all, there's freedom of movement at this point between Palestine and Israel. Like there are some restrictions.
No wall. There's no wall.
There's no wall.
Like,
yeah. There's a freedom of movement. You have Palestinians living in Gaza that are freely able to go to West Bank and vice versa, and even go into Israel as well and go to the Israeli schools. And Israelis can go to Palestinian schools if they choose to do so in the West Bank. And that's why the strike is so significant, because like Palestinians are still a functioning part of the Israeli labor force. So that's why they do this general strike. They're fighting with rocks, stone throwing. It becomes this symbolic representation of resisting against the Israeli occupation, which started originally when, what was it? It was an Israeli truck that killed 4 Palestinians, right? And then there were no legal repercussions for it.
Yeah. Correct. And there was a massive, you had then also like it was a snowball thing. I believe I got to look up because there was a follow-on protest in a different city, or a follow-on riot in a different city that then like in Bethlehem or something that like is part of what has things quote unquote explode or whatever.
Yeah, in Jabalia, after the IDF truck collided with a civilian car, killing 4 Palestinian workers, 3 of whom were from the Jabalia refugee camp, and then they thought it was a deliberate response for the killing of an Israeli in Gaza days earlier. Israel denied the crash, which came at times at a heightened tension. And then they deployed 80,000 soldiers, opening up live rounds on people who were throwing rocks and shit. But you mean like there was a second? You're saying like immediately after the
well, there was
car crash.
essentially that like part of what made it, you know, what made the Intifada, like, you know, beyond that one incident emerge and like sort of escalates it, is this like sort of these coordination networks that grow up in different Palestinian cities. And so that is the kind of like defining feature of this Intifada and of this moment of struggle, because the Palestinians are able to develop, you know, like I mean, strikes, boycotts, health clinics. Like, it's a very inspiring moment for the Palestinian people. And their timing is also very good because the H.W. Bush administration is taking over in the late 80s. And like, while Reagan and the Reaganites were pretty happy to like slap at Israel when they felt it necessary. Actually, here's a good story from you. So yeah, here's a good story.
Are you gonna pull up the Edgar Mantum article about?
No.
Poppy?
So this is about Reagan. So this is like to give you an example of the Reagan attitude toward Israel. So in 81, Israel bombs the Iraqi nuclear reactor Osirak. And here's an excerpt from a New York Times like column by a former Reagan official. And he's just called Reagan on the phone, and he's waiting to hear from him because he just told him what happened at Osirak. In what seemed an eternity, but was only 2 minutes or so, President Reagan was on the line, a slight note of irritation in his voice. Yes, Dick, what is it? I quickly recited what happened, and he asked me to repeat the message. After pausing for a few seconds, he asked, why do you suppose they did that? My answer was something to the effect that the Israelis clearly did not want that reactor to become operational. He went silent, and the phone line again filled with the churning of the copter. With characteristic aplomb, he suddenly asked, well, you know what? What, Mr. President? His retort was classic. Boys will be boys.
Huh.
So, like, you know, he let him go, but then HW comes around in 89 and 90, and the Israelis create problems for him. By the 1990s, you know, Iraq is, you know, making noise, it's making muscle. Israel is a potential site of retaliatory action. And even though Israel has a nuke, that's not a thing that you can actually use as a deterrent unless you yourself are under existential threat. You know, there is a sense, you know, and this is also not the Saudi Arabia of today. There's not the, you know, the Arab world is not as, nowhere near as overtly friendly to Israel as they are now. The Bush administration sees an opportunity, you know, like they're like, you know, we're gonna exert, and Baker and Bush are willing to, you know, use some pressure to get Israel to the table at Madrid in 91. And that's sort of what leads to the Oslo process, but I'm sure which Ben will get into. But I wanted to just sort of place the like Intifada at like the beginning of the sort of chain of events that leads there, because it's only through like this Palestinian pressure that develops that, you know, there is even like a Israeli, you know, security premise that's again tested, and that ultimately will give a domestic peace camp an opening, which I'm really not sure is possible today because of, you know, what'll go on to happen in Israel in the 90s. You know, it's how it was possible, I think, in some measure then.
There are a couple lessons to be learned here that Israel will never, ever give an inch of territory without violence. And I think this is something that Palestinians learn throughout this history, both in Lebanon and time again with other regional actors. And even with like even with security concerns creating that one brief moment, even though it's not like a real legitimate agreement in my opinion, but with Yitzhak Rabin, their understanding turns into, oh shit, like we have to fight back. There's never an opportunity for peace without violent emancipation, violent emancipatory actions. I think that's important to note. And the tactics change as the brutality increases on the Israeli side, as Palestinians feel like they have no other option.
Yet these widespread riots and violent confrontations and terrorist attacks all the way from 1987 to 1991. By this time, Yitzhak Rabin has taken over as prime minister of Israel, and pushed by George H.W. Bush, the government of the state of Israel
Didn't talk about Ariel Sharon at all, by the way.
Negotiating with the Palestine Liberation Organization.
He comes up more significantly later.
Really weird shift, considering that Yasser Arafat is a master terrorist responsible for...
Master terrorist. He calls him a master terrorist this time.
I mean, it's funny. It's really funny how he gets to master terrorist when like the reality is that like in 1991, by this time, like Arafat has like kind of laid his shit down. He's like, we're good. Like he's like, we're gonna come to the peace table. And he's like not at all this figure, and that like in fact they're like the story of the Palestinian resistance movement in the 1980s, if anything, is like a process of like a lot of splintering and the emergence of factors that in time, especially of the Islamist bent, that will give once with the decline of the Marxist groups and with the rise of the Islamist groups, there will again be a new kind of counter and a group willing to take on the mantle of violent resistance over time.
Yeah.
Because while these guys will reject armed struggle, Hamas doesn't.
Yeah.
Murders on his hand. He, at this point, has been expelled all the way to Tunis, right? He's not even in the picture. And Israel brings him out of retirement, basically, and says, why don't we negotiate with you? And maybe you can make all of this stop. So in 1993, they signed the Oslo Accords, and that is where you get Bill Clinton presiding over one of the least successful international negotiations in the history of international politics. The Oslo Accords have been a complete and utter failure. That ends with Yitzhak Rabin, who's this historic general. Who's
pause.
been prime minister.
I agree with him, but not for the reasons why he's saying it.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like, it was a great, like, from Israel's perspective, it was amazing. Like, it worked out.
Yeah, I don't know why he's complaining.
I want to wait for him to say, like, does he say what happens to Rabin? I just want him to see if he says that.
Yeah.
No, hold on. Hold on. I want to see if he gets there.
He peacefully retires.
Minister of Israel a couple of times by this point, shaking hands with a mass murdering terrorist, Yasser Arafat.
Oh my God, dude, he's taking the position.
He deserved it.
Yeah, he's taking the position of a young Benjamin Netanyahu at this point.
He's holding up the coffin at that parade. Bro.
Yeah. In fucking like this is like in 2021 too. He's literally like, oh my God. He's like, yeah, Rabin deserved it for shaking hands with an arch terrorist.
And this was going to initiate a new period of health and accord, and there was going to be peace. All that the PLO had to do was acknowledge that Israel existed and had a right to exist, stop educating their children in terrorism, and cease the violence. They couldn't do anything.
That's not what, I'm going to be honest, chat. That's not really what the Oslo Accord stipulated. That's not what was it. It's not. That's not the
Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords was Yitzhak Rabin going, hey, can you please stop teaching children terrorism class?
Like, literally, the U.S. wrote textbooks of, like, here's how you count, like, for children in Afghanistan to be, like, count to 10 using using one bomb, 2 bombs, like, and, like, we did that. And Israelis probably did that to some extent for Hamas, too, for sure. Bro, oh God, no, Oslo was about, like, this process of a continuing series of negotiations that ultimately, he eventually, I'm sure he'll say something about this in 2000. Like, they culminate in 2000 when Ehud Barak, after Bibi has his stint as prime minister in the late 90s, it goes bad. Then Ehud Barak, he is a labor figure, but he is not Rabin. He is not Rabin. And the reason that he's not Rabin,
even Rabin historically, even Rabin, whether because he had his own personal consideration, like his own political career to think of, or because he legitimately didn't care for a real nation state, time and time again told the Israeli people that he wanted to build a nation, but not a real Palestinian nation, right?
I think yes, although part of I tend to believe that part of why Rabin died was because he would have been because this is the real juice with the two-state solution in the pre-Oslo or the Oslo era. Not anything in the last 20 years, but we're talking about from let's say we're in the 90s. Like the thing that was I think a realistic possibility then, if Rabin wasn't dead by 95, the end of 95, they are able to build a Palestinian polity that has international recognition and thus the ability to level international grievances. once that gets established, like all of a sudden, you know, like, is that how it is permanently? Does that not lead over some time to a binational state? Like, you know, there was like, if Oslo had been, to me, it's not about like wish casting that this is what would have happened, obviously. It's that I do think that Rabin was killed because he was enough of a, you know, he had enough authority as a Zionist forefather. And also, a real, you know, animosity for what the Israeli right was becoming, that I think it was, you know, I mean, it's a recipe, I would argue, like, if anybody could have been an Israeli Lincoln, it could have been him, you know? Like, it's like, I accept that. There's a movie called Incitement about his killer, who is a fascist, who was later allowed to, I believe, have children via, like, you know, test tube or whatever. Or maybe not, maybe it was conjugal, with a woman who fell in love with him over TV. Yigal Amir, he's a total freak. But yeah, like I do think that there was, like, Yitzhak Rabin, the Roadmap for Peace. There was a it wasn't like a it was doomed, and history has revealed it to have been yet another catastrophe for the Palestinians. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like it was a sad event also, because like. There were, you know, the largest protest that Israel ever had for something resembling peace.
100,000 people, right? That's what I've heard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what it's like, the night of the 100,000.
Yeah.
But you know, it's like liberal Zionists love to point to it as exculpatory, when like the only real moral way to remember it is, of course, as like, you know, fucking insane tragedy.
Yeah, he gets assassinated. Have you ever heard Benjamin Netanyahu talk about it, by the way? Because he gives an interview after his assassination where he says one of the most
like fucking Ivan Drago. If he dies, he dies.
Yeah, like one of the most cold-blooded, worst piece of shit fucking things you could ever say, where he's like, yeah, I could have defeated him, but unfortunately he had to be martyred. And it's like, dude, that's insane to say. Like, you're an insane person. After calling for his death, too, at your fucking, at your rallies. Real villain shit. And he wasn't wrong, by the way. The reality is, as far as I understand it, he could have defeated him. So the reason why I think that's important to take note of, just like the reason why I think it's important to also mention that, like, you know, Rabin had the bone-breaking policy in the first Intifada, specifically to, you know, break the hands of Palestinian children who were throwing rocks, so that, you know, they would learn their lesson and they'd never be able to engage in this symbolic act ever again, is because that's the most fucking, like, peaceful dove that you were ever going to get. That was the most peaceful concessions you were ever going to get from a person who at least understood, in order for there to be a permanent security, that, like, Palestinians do need to go in the, like, Israel needs to go in the exact opposite direction of what it wanted to do, and legitimately offer Palestinians, like, a nation, rather than continuing to oppress them. But he was right. You know, that's why October 7th happened. You know, it's a culmination of all these factors.
Exactly. It's precisely.
Anyway, and that's why the top of the hour ad break comes at the top of every hour. Sorry, I'm going to run that right now while we continue with this video. Okay.
Of those things, right? So none of that happened. Instead, there's an uptick in violence, pretty dramatic uptick in violence after the Oslo Accords. In 1998, Israel again attempts to make some sort of concessions to the Palestinians, this time under the first tenure of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel does not want to govern these areas. Israel is not interested in governing millions of Palestinians in the Gaza.
Them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah,
small bean Israel. By the way, I love Netanyahu. Like, the reason why he's saying Israel does not want to govern these areas is because he's gonna, like, tie this to 2005, right? Like, he's gonna try to say, like, you know, Israel.
Well, he'll get there, but you'll see how he frames the pullout, because he makes it like it jibes with his, like, Arabs love to live in trash shit, you know.
Strip or in Judea and Samaria. The last thing that.
Oh, by the way, he did not mention what happened to Rabin. I wonder why.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good point. He didn't mention what happened to Rabin at all. Rabin, for those who don't know, because I don't think we said it explicitly, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was shot to death by that far-right provocateur as he was leaving a peace speech, this big, like a tremendous speech or whatever, and he was, like, shot on the way into his cab, or into his limo. And
Never
it's
forget.
like,
And Israelis voted for the guys who called for his assassination in almost every single election ever since. Like there was a
truly,
coalition.
like it's like it was a like, you know, if there was ever going to be a time for him to get away with it, like, you know, like with peace, I mean, like it was clearly at that exact moment and no later.
So there was another thing. Oh, he also doesn't mention conveniently like Baruch Goldstein is like a very important. Like he just kind of says there's an uptick in violence. Like I wonder how there was an uptick in violence. Like how did that happen? Was there like a pivotal event of sorts, or a continuation of violence? Sorry.
And in addition to Baruch Goldstein, the massacre at the Cave of the Patriarchs, there's also, I mean, there is like growing discontent within Israel. And look, like a lot of Israelis have left. A lot of the people who were the bleeding edge of the social criticism that emerged from this research, you know, let's say that of Ilan Pape or the new historians, like their findings are coming out at around this time. And the backlash pushes them out of Israeli society. And so this is also like part of what we're seeing is that like the killing of Rabin augurs like a sense that like, you know, for Israel to have existed in the liberal democratic order, it had to have a, you know, patina of a civil society that would function and was capable of some sort of open discourse. The intensification of occupation in the countries just turned to the right from, I guess, the late 90s onward. Has just sort of meant a kind of permanent, I mean, is what has felt like a fucking like permanent enclosure of, you know, what politics can happen with Israel. And it's, you know, I think it's that, like, for what it's worth, I think that constriction is a lot of what people find similar to like Nazi stuff or other like one party state comparisons, just because like Israel, for all of the fractiousness of its politics, like the consensus of politics within that country is just so narrow.
I mean, that's why the joke is like Israel's politics is just like far right, and then like the most far right thing you've ever heard in your life, like the most like Hitlerian politics of all time.
Instead, there's an uptick in violence, pretty dramatic uptick in violence after the Oslo Accords. In 1998, Israel again attempts to make some sort of concessions to the Palestinians, this time under the first tenure of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel does not want to govern these areas. Israel is not interested in governing millions of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip or in Judea and Samaria. The last thing they want to do.
But okay, this is also like the way he's talking about this is like Israel doesn't want to fucking these unwashed, dirty Arabs. Like,
he's just like, I mean,
guys.
When it's just like not like it's like he's just like, it's like, well, then why are they then?
Why are they in West Bank then? Why do they keep rapidly expanding at this time frame where he's talking about like, with our knowledge and go ahead, by the way, in this exact same time frame, now we are moving towards like the supposed two-state solution, right? Where Palestinians are recognized as at least like somewhat of a legal entity, or and there's an inception of like the development of a nation state. Obviously, they have no standing army, and the only security forces they have are like oftentimes operating at the behest of Israel. And in that entire time frame, like the right to return is never even it's never even seriously looked at by the Israeli authorities. There's like not a single. Would you say it's unfair to say that like there's not a single fucking Israeli negotiations process that looks at right to return as like a legitimate demand?
No, there's never been one, and they've and this is the thing, is that there have always been Israeli diplomats, I think, been like you know, you hear there are people who have like worked on the Israeli side, like Daniel Levy, I know, who's sort of well known in these. He's a British guy who was on one of the negotiating teams in the past, and is now he's a very, very fierce critic of the Israeli government, sort of period, and Israeli policy. And he's a smart guy. He's very plugged in. You know, I don't believe that like anything's impossible, in the sense that, like, I mean, like, look, we're heading toward a reality where the facts on the ground in the West Bank are making anything but binationality just like too difficult to fathom. Like, setting aside that, there is there are ways, and like there is a constructive basis for thinking about like, well, how can right of return work, and how do we develop a framework for assessing what kinds of claims are, and so on. It's just that like nobody wants to do that because it would involve both Israel paying a price, and if Israel is going to pay the price, then that means clearly other countries are. So I also do think that there is like a real question of like part of the basis for like why right of return and all these other things never get touched isn't because they not Daniel Levy, the owner of Tottenham Hotspur, another British Jewish guy. We have a lot of similar names, I know. Please try not to be anti-Semitic. But the like Daniel Levy, like, or what I think people like him sort of make a point of saying is that, you know, like right of return just never gets touched because it's that important, and it's that important, and because it's that important, you know, we've like the parties, like I mean, Palestinians have to be in a position like there has to be a negotiation for some measure of adjudication or whatever. I don't think that there is a like I don't want to put words in Daniel Levy's mouth, but which is just to say though that like I don't think that like right of return is just some like red line that can never be diplomatically addressed. I think that actually like it's the kind of issue for which like diplomacy, you know, theoretically exists, that like we, you know, nations and people come together to try and figure out what is like a just process of rehabilitation, restitution, and, you know, land back. Like to what extent can that be accomplished? But you know, it's a very like Israel has done a very good job of making sure that like that stuff never gets really broached, because it's always about like, you know, I mean, it's never really gotten beyond land transfers meaningfully.
Would you say yes, absolutely? And the land transfers are not even 1-to-1 either. It's like I think the last one is like the last one that's even discussed like a 1-to-8. But would you say that it's fair to say that the two-state process and all of these peace negotiations are simply just like biding time and continuously expanding into the West Bank and partitioning off occupied Palestinian territory illegally, according to international law, at a rapid clip, while simultaneously like dangling a potential negotiation against a completely neutered, powerless Arafat and a Palestinian Authority that is like, at this point, a collaborative mechanism of the Israeli security apparatus, oftentimes working against the more violent militant factions that are being born out of this like inability to come to terms with the Palestinians and their very just and understandable needs of ending this occupation. That was a long question, but I don't know.
No, I think it is. I think that the two-state solution in diplomacy, like it is, you know, however, some of the like if we like, let's just call it like for simplicity, let's refer to it as like the Israel peace policy. Like whoever the Israel peace policy architects, whatever they had hoped for, whatever they thought the aspirations, you know, could ultimately be, what the policy revealed itself as over the course of, let's say, like 15 years, from like 93 to 08, I would say up until like 09, like when Netanyahu comes into office for the second time, you know, it really is. It was just time wasting. The Israelis were never serious. The U.S. was only serious insofar as it felt that it had to assume the posture of seriousness. But, you know, as is the case with like everything where the U.S. isn't like immediately forced by circumstance, it just withered on the vine, which is now why, you know, we have this policy led by, you know, Sleepy Joe that is about as sleepy as you can imagine, as reactive as you can imagine, because we literally had no other idea than to support Israel in biding its time while it rearranged the reality such that like the actual idea that we had subscribed to of a two-state solution became, you know, went from being impractical to impossible.
I think it's sheer arrogance. Like the Israeli policy, in my opinion, if you want to define it by one word, is arrogance.
I think that's fair. I mean, it's arrogance.
Sorry, you
arrogance. I think the arrogance is cultivated, though. That's what makes it so special to me. Because like lots of countries and lots of nations are arrogant, and they can't find ways to act on it, or they still restrain themselves, but they still have the sensation and the national attitude and the strategic outlook that is arrogant. In the case of Israel, it's just like it's like a fucked up kid. We just never said no. We never, we just like
kept giving him more hamsters to kill.
Exactly. And then we're like, Jesus, why are all these hamster corpses nailed up on the wall? I have to keep buying him hamsters. It's just like there's no fucking end to it until, again, like until Israel does something that is so bad that America has to be like, well, fuck, the rest of the world will not respect us unless we do something. And, that is like, like that's like, to me, like the worst case scenario of like what Israel could be testing today is how much can we get away with in the absence of a coherent, military strategy with achievable goals.
And anyone who tells you, chat, that like America is trying, because I see these liberals online that are, just reading fucking Wikipedia pages for the first time in their lives to learn where like Palestine is, or reading, watching PragerU videos to develop talking points for themselves to defend like a position that is indefensible. One thing that you'll hear this notion that like Joe Biden is actually trying to stop and restrain Israel to the best of his ability. I'm sure you've seen this as well, Noah. Like, there's a lot of liberals out there who keep saying, like, Joe Biden is actually trying his best to restrain Israel, guys. And it's like, that's fucking bullshit. You can restrain Israel yesterday. You could have restrained Israel at any point.
By the way, it's not just libs who say that. It's a conservative meme. They say that Joe Biden is holding back Israel as well.
Yeah, but they say it in a negative way.
Because Iran is making him do it. So that, it's people say that, clearly to save face, but that just goes back to what we were saying earlier about the humanitarian pause thing, where it was like they needed to come up with something that sounded like it was something it would never get achieved, but you could point to it in hindsight and say, like, we tried, we did our best.
Bro,
and
they got $325 million in additional funding, like that they found in their budget to send additional missiles to Israel, like yesterday. This is before like an actual legislative action is implemented. And also, as you talked about as well, the Indies Time reporting showed that like they're looking for back channel, like secret ways of sending billions of dollars worth of weapons to Israel without any accountability whatsoever. So the idea that like these guys are trying to restrain Israel is fucking ridiculous when in the past, I believe it's over here somewhere. Hold on. Let me pull this up real quick. In the past, where the fuck is it? Hold on. I don't know if you watched that Jake Tapper thing. That was mind-boggling. It was very frustrating. In his book, The Last Politician, Franklin Foer shows when Biden finally demanded Netanyahu stop the bombing of Gaza in 2021. Hey, man, we're out of runway here, the president replied. It's over. He said it's Jover. And then, like that, it was. By the time the call ended, Netanyahu reluctantly agreed to a ceasefire that the Egyptians were broker.
What are the differences between then and now? The difference then is that all Joe Biden had to do was say, you've made your point, stop. Now, though, right, like Israel is hopped up. Israel is mad. Israel will not just be dissuaded by Sleepy Joe. And Israel also knows that Sleepy Joe does not have the domestic juice to pull this off. The only way that like Joe could use this leverage is if he does something, it's the ultimate tragedy, right? It's that the only thing that stops Israel is the one thing Joe will not give, which is a really, really full-throated argument for cut this shit out, stop it. And that is where it's a real, like, when you get to the level of what's missing from this equation, what is Biden doing or not doing, it really just comes down to the fact that, like, if we know that in the past he can do it with a phone call when the flames are lower, now that the flames are really fucking high as they've ever been, higher than they are in most, situations of total war between two developed nations, then, you would need to see something that rises to that level, that matches that urgency. People aren't crazy for expecting that.
The exact opposite of this, okay? Like, it's so fucking cowardly, in my opinion, that you have Biden administration officials like quietly going to the Washington Post, quietly going to the media to be like, hey guys, these guys don't know what the fuck they're doing. It's actually pretty fucked up. I wash my hands of this ethnic cleansing campaign. whether because they have no other options and like no one is responding to them in high enough positions of power within the administration, or because like they also want to say like this is out of our hands a little bit, even though everybody knows that is not the case. They're doing this also. Like I mentioned, the $320 million transfer of precision bombs for Israel, a major weapons deal that comes amid heightened concerns. Like, you can't do that. You can't have it both ways. You can't like have put out feelers saying like Israel has no plan, and then turn around and fucking give them more weapons to engage in ethnic cleansing. It's completely unacceptable. Sorry. All right, let's continue.
Do is have their soldiers wandering around these dangerous areas or to preside over these areas. All they want, and all Israel has ever wanted, is to separate off from these particular areas and say, listen, you guys rule yourselves. Like, just stop.
Like, come on, dude. Is that why 500,000, like 700,000 total fucking settlers live in East Jerusalem and also the West Bank? In this time frame that he's referencing, the number goes from like 10,000 settlers to fucking 400,000 in the West Bank because they just hate living alongside Palestinians. They just want to like leave them alone. Really?
Bothering us, please. Okay, and you will see that this is the continued pattern. 2000, Israel engages in the Camp David negotiations. Bill Clinton is still president at this point, and the prime minister of Israel is now a guy named Ehud Barak. And Ehud Barak is a real dove. Ehud Barak wants to make as many concessions as humanly possible.
Himself a former military leader. Benjamin Netanyahu made him a defense minister in a Netanyahu government. And he's, in addition to being a Jeffrey Epstein pal and military entrepreneur, he was also a member of Sayeret Matkal, the Israeli Special Forces unit in which Bibi himself served. Ehud Barak is many things. He is not a dove.
The idea of claiming that Ehud Barak is a dove is psychotic, especially when very publicly he mentions on no uncertain terms, time and time again, that he is not interested in like real negotiations at all. Once again, I will state, I don't know if he's doing that because he cares about his, like, I don't know if it's because of electoral considerations, like political considerations, which at this point, the last time this is happening, he has no power, right? Like he's on his way out, like officially. So it doesn't even fucking matter at that point because. And
the final offer is like, was so pathetic so as to not be serious. The amount of land that was offered, the status of Jerusalem, like the right of, like there was no, the Israelis had never yielded, and the Palestinians had compromised immensely. There was just no, like the thing that Israeli defenders will say, maybe Ben will say this, was the Israelis made their offer, and the Palestinians didn't even make a counteroffer, and they just went home and said, fuck you. And that obviously wasn't, it was like, well, no, actually, the Israeli offer was that stupid and that bad that it showed the whole thing was a farce. Which then leads to what I'm sure Ben has been championing at the bit.
But there's more. But there's more. There's more. There's, as you also pointed out, like Bill Clinton fucking lied, which shocking. I know. How could a man with such moral clarity, who does not have a track record of lying about everything? Both of them are Jeffrey Epstein pals, by the way. Both of the motherfuckers on here, big pals of Jeffrey Epstein. Just want to point that out. Openly collaborated, colluded, and literally fucking claimed that Yasser Arafat never wanted to deal in this final negotiations process, when in fact the only thing that was, as far as I understand, that was out of his hands personally was what to do with Jerusalem. That was like a non-starter. But even beyond that, Arafat still gave concessions on Israel's own demographic considerations, as far as like even allowing 15,000 Palestinian refugees to come back into Palestinian territories, and then kickstarting a process where they could like do some semblance of a right to return that would, like I said, factor in Israel's demographic concerns. It's so ruthless. Like I'm not a Arafat fan by any means. I don't think that he was like,
no, but it was just like, it was the 2000. It just revealed the whole thing was a farce, and then what Israel did next, only made it even more so.
Right? This picture here, which is just an unbelievable picture. Bill Clinton and Ehud Barak trying to push Yasser Arafat into negotiating, right? They're all joking, they're all happy and all this kind of crap. Ehud Barak offered everything. Ehud Barak offered complete control over the Temple Mount with just like a little bit of a recognition that Israel has a historic claim religiously to the Temple Mount. Arafat turned it down flat. He offered control over virtually all of Judea and Samaria. He offered control over the Gaza Strip, right? A Palestinian state, boom, done.
Wait, no, that's not true. Why is he saying that? Is that true?
I mean, what he's like, so he's collapsing a lot. So first, let's go to like, I mean, if we want to roll the tape on the 2000 offer, like the land swaps, 2000 Israel offer, land swaps. Bum, bum.
An Israeli withdrawal from 91% of what Israel defined as West Bank, which didn't include large portions of the West Bank, were unilaterally annexed to occupy East Jerusalem post 1967.
Here, I'm sending you a link.
Oh, okay. That's what I was looking at right now, actually. That's the one I was looking at.
It's a good one.
An Israeli withdrawal from 91% of what Israel defined as West Bank. Israel's insistence on this definition of the much reduced West Bank, rather than the internationally recognized pre-1967 boundaries of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, precluded agreement on a starting point for negotiations on borders. Israeli annexation of the remaining 9% of the already shrunken West Bank in exchange for a 9-to-1 land swap for unspecified land in Israel. That, like, I mean, that's disgusting.
That's the other thing he talks about. So you notice how Ben talks about the Temple Mount, because Ben is a religious Zionist for whom the third temple's exact location matters a whole lot and is a major concession, even though Jews will never rebuild it. As opposed to the existing mosque that's there. But anyway,
the third holiest site for Muslims,
Muslims, but you know, either way, the thing is that like but go down. It's like, oh, what's the settlements in East Jerusalem? We're not up for negotiation. So it's like, oh, the Temple Mount. That's like a very nice way of eliding the fact that like Palestinians in East Jerusalem were basically going to be subject forever to encroachment by Jewish settlers. I mean, it's just there's this. The whole thing was like Israel was offering not a state. It was offering not really the land. It was not offering anything that resembled control. And it did so in such a spectacularly insulting fashion that it became very clear that there would be no way for the PLO to continue negotiating and maintain credibility with Palestinians. Because that's the other thing here that like Ben doesn't seem to give a shit about, which is, well, what do Palestinians want? And what are their national aspirations? If the PLO doesn't walk out of this room, doesn't say fuck you to the Israelis for this piece of shit offer, then what would have happened to them? And would it have been something that, somebody like Ben ostensibly would consider worse, which would be the, replacement of the PLO with, say, another political party in Palestinian politics?
Yeah. Palestine would be a non-militarized state, of course, which is ridiculous, sometimes referred to as demilitarized, with only a police force for internal security. At no point is there ever a consideration for a standing military or like an actual military force for Palestinians, even when some of the counters suggested were to have like an international coalition of like international military forces to at least like be the standing army on the Jordanian border. And Israel, of course, says absolutely not. It would have had like American forces and everything else, but like they just never. It was never even a consideration that like Israel will pull out their forces from occupied the occupied territories. I think that this is of course, like at this point has completely eviscerated Arafat's broad governing mandate that he started off with like 85% or 87%, right, in the first elections that took place. At this point, Palestinians completely recognize that like Arafat has sold out himself to in a not dissimilar way to the Palestinian Authority and the way that people view Abbas and the Palestinian Authority in general. That like this, alongside a bunch of other actions that they took against Hamas at the behest of Israel, made them deeply unpopular, and in my opinion, pushed Palestinians more and more towards recognizing that they had no options and like that Israel was not trying to negotiate with them at all. Pushed them further and further into the hands of more violent factions. No matter what they're...
And by extension, that the Americans couldn't be trusted either. Because this is the other thing. We're the ones who this whole time are administering this process. All of the credibility that Palestinians may have with us to operate, is squandered. So now, when we're in the middle of this crisis in 2023, we are basically influencing everything entirely through intermediaries. We're dealing directly with Israel, of course, but Qatar is our way of interfacing directly with the Palestinians. We have, because obviously, you know, we just saw Tony Blinken sit next to Mahmoud Abbas, two people who, quite respectively, are not making the meaningful political decisions for their people. Yeah, I mean, we can see how the failures of the present have become, you know, like emerged from those mistakes of or like those failures, really, not mistakes, those failures of the past.
Like, people talk about Hamas's popularity in general to be like, they voted for Hamas. It's like, even in its like neutered state, Hamas only beat out the secular parties by like 3%. I think they beat out Fatah by like 3% before the coup, which was America's fault, obviously, as we talked about before. But no matter what, even now, when Palestinians are polled on the matter, like, Hamas is still not necessarily like a super popular force in general.
Americans of all people should be familiar with the concept of rejection of the status quo and incumbents, you know? Like, it's a very American tradition to vote for the other guys simply because the current guys suck fucking ass.
Yeah.
And that was surely the case for Palestinians, who are just as human as the rest of us.
Yeah.
And so if Hamas's argument was, we're not going to make the concessions that the other guys did, and that's pretty much all their platform, even if they are socially retrograde in ways that many Palestinians may put, you know, like pinch their nose at, it was an opening. And it made a lot of sense, especially if they were able to plausibly say we're less corrupt. Because that's the other thing that I think in a lot of, you know, Israelis point to and say, oh, the corruption, the aid doesn't even reach people. When the reality is that actually, like, what you're calling corruption is just the fact that the PA doesn't get enough aid. And so part of what ends up happening in that situation where you've got the skinflint aid program supporting a civil society is that it goes to favored friends and families and cousins and so on. And so you end up getting this, you know, very, you know, it becomes like a very degraded political situation when it has effectively this, you know, circumscribed space to grow in.
Yeah. All of which have forced the hands of Palestinians to, like you said, pinch their nose and go with the other guy. But in every single circumstance, by the way, the latest polling on this is that if there's only one group, Hamas is still not that broadly popular. But if there's only one group that's less popular than Hamas, it's fucking the Palestinian Authority. What does that say about the way that Israel has dealt with the situation? If we all understand...
It says that they've learned from the Americans, that they've modeled their system on ours.
Exactly. If there is any... Like, there's no way to deal with Hamas other than a political solution. There's no... Like, not an economic one in the way that Israel tried to, where they were like, oh, we'll just like offer some work visas to the Palestinians in Gaza while simultaneously still like starving them and putting them on a diet. And you know, maybe through marginal neoliberal economic prosperity measures, like, the Gazans will come to their senses. And even though we won't allow them to do an election, like, they'll overthrow Hamas or something. It's just like doesn't make any fucking sense whatsoever. Ultimately, the guys that you're supposed to show the Palestinians that you're dealing with, that are like collaborating with you, that are colluding with you, you're not even offering them anything. You're not like allowing Palestinians to thrive under the Palestinian Authority. Why the fuck would any Palestinian think that, like, why the fuck would any Palestinian ever think?
And so what do, right? So this is, and it's not just, and the thing is like Hamas officials do this too as well, but it's, you know, this is a very common ailment. Like, the Palestinian and Hamas officials, they develop foreign reserves. They put money away in Dubai. Maybe they get a kid who gets into college in the United States or in somewhere in Europe. You know, like, this is a classic, you know, fairly non. I don't think that this is this part of the story is not particular to Palestinians. You know, Western powers are able to get a subordinate government or state power, quasi-state powers elite pretty much under their thumb and focused on making sure that their own personal families, you know, familial accumulation can move on and that they can advance and their kids can advance, as opposed to obviously, you know, thinking about like, well, how could we as a societal unit all together, you know, resist the conditions that we're in hopes of getting better ones?
Arafat does not even negotiate. He just launches a massive round of violence. I remember
Oh, dude, come on. He's like, yeah, this is Arafat. Arafat's doing. He's the one who's doing violence. These are such classic fucking tropes, dude. Like,
it's just like but it's like there's no nuance, you know. It's like he didn't think of any way to put a little bit of stink on it. It's just like the most dumbed down, stupid.
he could have just said
version.
Hamas at this point. Like, that's
Or
the
he
other
could have
thing.
said or he could have also said that, like, you know, like that there was, like, he doesn't even bring up like the Arik Sharon stuff, his fucking boy, you know, like doing the walk on the Temple Mount and pissing off the entire fucking Muslim world, and you know, really launching off the second Intifada. I'm sure he'll get to the suicide bombing soon, but like, ugh.
This because I was actually in Israel right about the time they launched the Intifada, and there were suicide bombings on a fairly regular basis. They blew
I'm
up
not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anything, but I guess Ben was there during the second Intifada.
Pizza shop. I was supposed to be at that corner like a couple of hours later. This was a thing that was really scary. It was really violent. Remember, he launched that not after Israel did something aggressive. He launched that after Israel offered him everything he could possibly want.
This is such a ridiculous bastardization of events that took place. Yeah, no, it was Arafat personally who was like, it's time to send the rounds of terror. I think the only thing tying this to Arafat personally is what, like, Arafat's like widow, like 10 years after or some shit, like what said that that Arafat told her to stay put in Europe because he was gonna do the second Intifada. Like,
I mean, it's just like, it's such a yeah, no, I mean, he's trying to not make it seem like Israel had poked the bear that was like millions of Palestinians living in deprivation and being told that there would be no political way out, and then getting their faces rubbed in it by a fat fucking genocide heir waddling across their holy site. Like,
no,
you know,
said,
it's just
no, it was Arafat. Arafat said it's time to do a global jihad. He was like, the intercepted communications show Yasser Arafat talking to Hamas officials at the time, saying, I hate how moral the Israeli army is. It's time to do the global day of jihad. Yeah, they found it. They found intercepted messages. Yeah, Fatwa Fridays. Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God.
Anyway, yeah, that's also ridiculous. And once again, small bean Israel not at fault for, at this point, having a permanent stranglehold on the Palestinian population with no way out. There's also, would you say that, like, at this point, pulling out of Lebanon factors in?
He never says that like they only withdraw in 2000 and that withdrawal sucks. I mean, he'll get to talking about the 06 Lebanon war, I'm sure. But, you know, what that does is, so basically one of the other things that's going on, Lebanon is, you know, like from Israel's perspective, like the way Israel conceives of it geostrategically is that they got their Jordanian border, which they sign a permanent agreement with in the 90s with King Hussein, but it had been pretty quiet for some years. And then, Jordan is an aid state. It doesn't have a functioning purpose as a nation other than like it's just, as a polity, it doesn't work unless other countries pump it full of money, and that's just the way it is. We know about Egypt. We've talked about that and how Sadat sort of realigned it so that it was aligned with the U.S. and that border with Israel would be really permanently secure. So that takes two. So what does that leave you with? Lebanon and Syria. Lebanese politics were infamously sort of dominated by the heavy hand of Syrian politics at this time. Iran helps build a client political party and militant group, Hezbollah, that over the course of this time, by now well into the story, really is able to take on a life. It's able to take on a life of its own. It's not fair just to describe it as some Iran patsy or anything like that. Israel is no longer in it's not in a strategically favorable position to just leave its soldiers in southern Lebanon occupying, whether it's, the bases that they have and the patrols that they go on to just try and, to keep space, to keep the border area secure. It is no longer worth it. And so they begin withdrawing. Once upon a time, part of the purpose of being in Lebanon had also been because there was a lot of Palestinian resistance activity in Lebanon. But those days are over. And
Israel utilizes two different groups. Like there's their own settlers that they put into places to expand. And then they also utilize Palestinians as a reason to expand, or at least like occupy other areas where they're like, okay, well, you got Palestinians there. We got to deal with them.
And once upon a time, they would also say that they were, there on behalf of, say, Christian Arabs. So that had been the case in Lebanon. But by the 1990s, like, Israel has worn out its welcome completely with Lebanese Christians, and they're not really able to be a viable patron for them. Essentially, like, the strategic quandary that Israel is faced with in the 2000s then is, well, how do we secure our northern border? In the case of Syria, that problem kind of fixes itself with the outbreak of the Syrian civil war, which is a huge boon for Israel in that its biggest border, its biggest border threat is suddenly now, basically focused on maintaining its own survival. And Israel, that's why Israel feels free to annex the Golan in later years. And in the case of Lebanon, the state authority there just gets so weak. The military itself does not pose any threat and has no chance of it. And Hezbollah and Israel, we'll hear more about from Ben's point of view in this, but by 2006, they're sort of it's like the post-Israeli withdrawal and the rise of Hezbollah in the 2000s or further rise of Hezbollah in the 2000s, Israel suddenly feels compelled, and the Israeli security state feels vulnerable to a threat from the north. And that is where the roots of the 2006 conflict come in.
Can I say something even before 2006? Do you think it's appropriate to say that the 2000 Israeli withdrawal was also, in the eyes of at least some Palestinians, like a way more meaningful solution to end an occupation from the way that they see it? Also shows them like, well, what the fuck? These guys, like, Hezbollah got what they wanted. Israel's no longer there. There's no longer a military occupation. Our guys are fucking trying to negotiate with Israel, and all they're getting is like more occupation, more territory taken away. I think that's like another competing factor, or another competing motivation that like is a political fuck up, thinking that like you can just pass the buck down the line on what to do on the Palestinian question and what to do with the Palestinians, simultaneously showing the Palestinians like, you're not willing to negotiate with them. You're going to keep fucking settling. You're going to keep building settlements. You're going to keep occupying them while they see other places being able to violently resist. So again, pushing them further and further into engaging in violent emancipation.
I mean, this is why giving Palestinians a state, arguably like a state, actively, it shows like, yeah, that's one of the advantages that Hezbollah has, and part of why also Nasrallah and others have spent so much time developing its political capacity well beyond its military force projection against Israel. Like, it's a party. It is able to, it's in government. Its ability to resist Israel is one thing, but like, political authority and political power counts for so much. In the case of Palestinians, like, that's kind of what makes Palestinians, not unique, but in this case, it's what makes them, and I would certainly imagine enrages Palestinians themselves, because they're so much more disempowered. They don't have any of those advantages that come of statehood. They don't have a political infrastructure that they can rely upon to generate support. They don't have outside, don't have external trade partners. Lebanese trade has been decimated, to be clear. But, even in the 2000s, like, you have like foreign interests that have a vested interest in not seeing your government fall to shreds. Whereas in the case of, Palestine doesn't have native industry. It has like a network of NGOs, a faucet from Israel and the UN. And like, that's it. And, they could try to build an economy, but like, that's never going to happen so long as they're under this, in this non-state permanent subordinate position.
If he weren't a damned liar who just wanted Israel wiped off the map. This, again, is the great lie, is that there is desire for a two-state solution from the Palestinian side. So far, there has been no evidence whatsoever that this is the case. Okay, 2004.
Except for like every single exit poll ever conducted, even all the way up until like 2017 on the Palestinian side, at least, like where there's like 53% support for it. Despite the fact that like a two-state solution at this point is like obviously a death sentence and a continuation of the subjugation and a continuation of the apartheid state, Palestinians still are like, no, we'll take the two-state, please, give us anything.
or Arafat dies, and Mahmoud Abbas takes over. Mahmoud Abbas is himself a terror supporter.
By the way, Arafat
doctoral
poisoned by the Israelis.
Yeah.
And Abbas, although Ben Shapiro is gonna talk about how he's a Holocaust denier and all this other shit, Abbas is the Israelis' boy. He is non-threatening. No one particularly likes him, and he is willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that his position within the PA domestically is not threatened.
That's what I mean. Like, that's the craziest part about this, is that Abbas, or the Palestinian Authority at this point, is the only entity that is less popular than Hamas in the eyes of Palestinians. Like, they are so, like, they're basically down there with, like, Israel in the eyes of Palestinians. It's like a continuation of Israel. It's an expression of Israel.
Dissertation.
So ridiculous. Even he's saying, like, this guy's a terrorist supporter too. Like, he sucks as well.
On Holocaust denial and why it's correct. Israel, in 2005, under the auspices of Ariel Sharon, who's one of the great hawks in Israeli history, right? He was the general in the 1973 war who ended up pushing all the way down close to Cairo. He was called the bulldozer. He's this famous general. He unilaterally withdraws from the Gaza Strip. There are a bunch of Jewish areas right in the northern tip of the Gaza Strip. Jewish soldiers went in and removed Jewish settlements.
Racism moves on. Fuck you, Ben.
Yeah, no, great guy, bulldozer. Very cool guy. Yeah, and then they pulled out of, I mean, at least he's not like...
I mean, so the disengagement was like, basically, you know, I'm not sure, and I don't think it's especially clear, there was no peace plan that Sharon was moving toward. He just realized that, like, this was not worth fighting, like, to preserve these limited settlements. And after Sharon dies, because he was a fat ass in bad shape and old, he ends up like it ends up being like this perfect, you know, setup to divide and conquer the Palestinians and to create what is the status quo of today: Hamas in Gaza, PLO in the West Bank.
Yeah. Also continued vociferously by Benjamin Netanyahu, or unless you were talking about Benjamin Netanyahu already.
No. I mean, that was what Sharon did, and then there was an interim leader, Olmert, who was a centrist and who, like, wasn't really in a position to do anything because he was fighting for political survival the whole time. But once he was out of office and after he'd served his time in jail, he made a really big point of saying that, like, you know, a two-state, like, I have regrets, and my biggest one is that, like, I didn't pursue diplomacy more seriously. And I kind of believe him, even if he is like a crook and a dumbass. But still, when Netanyahu comes in 2009, you know, there's a lot of, like, questions about, like, what exactly you know, like, I think we'll be learning more and more about whether Netanyahu maybe has some direct relationship with Hamas. Because I really do believe that ultimately, while Hamas is committed, you know, very evidently committed to some form of continued struggle against Israel, armed struggle against Israel, it has also, over the last 20 years, clearly entered into phases of either negotiated or strategic peace or ceasefire or whatever, some relative calm with Israel. And you know, the period of which that is beginning to start to happen is where Ben is starting to get into now in his Fantasyland version of events.
Yeah.
In the Gaza Strip, these are places people have lived for decades. They removed them and they just turned them over to
He's mad. He's mad that I mean, I knew he was going to say that. I knew that he was going to say, like,
and they turned them over, and look what those ungrateful.
Yeah. They ruined the green. They ruined the greenhouses, or the fucking they killed the greenhouses. They hate it because they love bombing. They love bombing shit.
The Palestinians, Hamas, a terrorist group, immediately rushed in and burned everything. They burned the greenhouses.
There you go. First of all, half of the greenhouses were literally destroyed by the settlers when they were leaving. The rest of the greenhouses and everything else that was left behind in a period of chaos when there was not enough, like, genuine security on the Palestinian side because the Israelis, like, pulled out violently with no, like, assurances whatsoever, was, of course, seized by whoever the fuck could get in there.
They burned all the Jewish houses. They knocked down all the good infrastructure, and then they just took over the place. This is when you start to see a difference.
They knocked down all the good infrastructure. Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Emerging among the Palestinians in terms of governance. You've got Judea and Samaria, the West Bank here. You've got the Gaza Strip here. In 2005, Abbas wins the Palestinian elections, but only because Hamas and Islamic Jihad boycott the elections. Okay, in 2006, after Israel withdraws from Gaza, remember, Israel's not in control of anything here now, Hamas wins an election. So the first move is not, oh, look, Israel wants to make concessions and make peace with us. The first move is, why don't we elect a terrorist group to actually...
It's great. I love this shit because it's like, it's so juvenile. Like, you have like a child brain when you...
It's just like, oh, well, we left and they chose those guys.
Yeah,
and
they
like,
Palestinians are bad, so they chose the bad guy party who was saying like, we're gonna do bad things because we're the bad guys. There you go.
Like,
this is my analysis. This is where it begins and ends.
like it's like where to begin of like, well, I mean, for one thing, Israel was pretty jazzed that Hamas won because it meant that the PLO was weak. And is, like intelligence cables, all the WikiLeaks cables from the time basically say that Israel was really happy that they won. I don't, I just don't.
I mean, and time again, this attitude was reinforced and openly stated. And that's why I always bring this up. Like, Benjamin Netanyahu openly was like, no, it's great. Everybody thinks these guys are terrorists. Everybody calls them terrorists. They're Islamist fundamentalists too. So it's like perfectly aligned with the war on terror. So like absolutely zero people are ever going to take their demands seriously, and they're never going to be an entity that could be a player in the international arena. So yeah, no, that's the beacon of Palestinian emancipation now. Hamas, bad guy terrorists, right? Openly stating in 2019 that if you want to thwart any nation state attempt of Palestinians, you have to fucking deal with Hamas. Just completely sidestep any other institution, any other organization that might be interested in being a voice for Palestinians. So it's great. Also, obviously, we talked about it, but for the sake of this video, it's important to note Hamas comes into power as the anti-corruption party. If you look at the exit polling from the time, at this point, they are definitely a violent emancipatory group, but their goals...
By the way, what does George W. Bush say when they get elected? He doesn't say, ooh, scary Muslims, ooh. He says, well, they rejected corruption. That is how George W. Bush fucking framed it.
Well, George W. Bush also had some other interests behind the scenes, it seems, at the time for what he personally wanted to do with Palestinians, because like he didn't want Hamas to win. He has his own guys, obviously, within Fatah. Those very same guys tell him, don't do this election. George W. Bush goes, no, we're going forward with it.
No, we're doing it. We're doing it,
no, we're doing it live. And then, of course, they fucking lose by a slim margin, but still they lose. And George W. Bush, in an expert move, goes, okay, let's just do a coup d'etat. Like, let's just fucking torture a bunch of these guys, a bunch of these Hamas guys who recently won an election. I'm sure it'll go over well, and then I wonder what Ben is going to say about it. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but like, remember, these guys aren't saying like, oh, we love terror, that's why we're voting for Hamas, because we are Islamists ourselves. Like, we love political Islam, we love Hamas. That's not the reason. They're like, these are the non-Western party. They're not they're the uncompromised party. So Islam only plays a role in that regard, where they're like, yeah, these guys are too fucking, these guys are zealots, and they're not corrupted by American influence in the same way that the PA is, is working as a cutout of like Israel's interest in the region.
Represent us. Okay, in 2008, Israel's response to this is, what if we just offer you everything? So Ehud Olmert becomes prime minister of Israel, and he proceeds to offer everything to Abbas. He gives him basically the same offer, but better than the offer that Barak gave in 2000. He offers everything. He offers Judea and Samaria. He says, we're going to keep some of the big Israeli settlements that exist here, but we're going to give you land swaps. You can keep the Gaza Strip, everything.
Wait,
Abbas...
He says, we're going to keep some of the big Israeli settlements that exist here. Bro, it's 2008, dog.
Yeah, wait, I want to see. Hold on. Yeah, let's pull up a map. Google a map and show what does 2008 settlements look like?
Hold on. I think there's like B'Tselem at this point. 2008 is like
2008. They're definitely I'm sure there's a fucking map. I'm sure it looks
No.
nuts.
I mean like B'Tselem has like a long they have like a interactive map that you can look at in how like settlements have grown at this point. In 2008, I'm pretty sure it's like 90% of the West Bank at this point is like the only area, like they have everything. I don't know why I can't get in here. Settlement map.
Yeah. Here we go.
The maps of Israeli settlements that shocked Barack Obama is the one article I found. As of December 2015, there's 6 million Jews combined.
Just look at that.
Yeah. Guys, you don't understand. Guys, you don't understand. He simply said he's giving everything. Everything.
Yeah, like it's so insane. Like it's just so crazy.
Yeah, everything except for, 90%. Also, no contiguity ever. That's the other part of this. No contiguity means that like no freedom of travel in your own land that is internationally recognized as your land. Okay? Ridiculous. There you go. This is a CIA map.
Does not even bother to issue a counteroffer. He just walks away from the table and launches violence. Gaza war begins 2008. Missiles flying in from Gaza. This is the first Gaza war. Israel has to go in Operation Cast.
What do you got? You got something for this?
I thought Abbas ruled the West Bank and that Gaza was Hamas. But maybe
no, you don't understand. Abbas is a terror supporter.
I just like it's. Yeah, I don't know what to like. I guess in 2009, like, look at Cast Lead, man. It's just such a fucking like. Let's see.
I love when it's like when dudes like Omer, or like when they have no political power remaining, they go back to the Palestinians and they're like, "Hey, let's do a deal." Just kidding. Here's the same piece of shit deal.
I mean, like, the thing is just that, yeah, there was a ceasefire and it expires in December 2008. There's a lot of provocation beforehand, but that doesn't matter to Ben. It's just Abbas had a bad diplomatic meeting, and so he launched some more war, and then Israel had to do it again in 2014. And there was something similar in 2018, 2019. Ignore the fact that those people were unarmed, blah, blah, blah.
And shut that down. 2014, this breaks out again. Another giant rocket attack from Hamas in Gaza. Israel has to go back in 2014 and shut it down. And that brings us to today.
I like that he just glanced over it, though. He's like, Israel.
By the way, I want to say, look at where we are in the fucking video. So he finishes the actual chronology until now, and then the rest of this video is just like piddling bullshit. It's crazy.
Wait, really?
Yeah, I'm not kidding, man. Like,
I'm actually shocked. We made it. There's still 19 minutes remaining in this video, and we've made it to 2014, and he skipped over. Every single time, it's like, oh, they launch rockets, and then Israel has to go in and shut it down.
Oh yeah. What about when What about when Israel like machine gunned people walking to a fence?
Yeah.
How about by the thousands?
Oh, he didn't know what that was. When he was at Oxford, he was talking to someone, and one of the students literally brings that up.
He was like,
brings that up. The Great March.
And it was and it's like he replied like Eric Cartman deadpan, like, I don't know what you're talking about.
No, he did like can you clarify, please? What are you talking about? And then he immediately deflected to, what do you mean Palestinian land? What do you mean Palestine? And then like, I watched him like in his mind go, oh shit, I have no fucking clue what this girl is talking about, and deflect away. Clarify. It's really fucking gross. But
all right, I think I gotta duck. I've had my Ben Shapiro fill for tonight.
Okay,
I would be down to do more.
I
want to do more Ben. Well, I want to do some more Ben Fisking later, but
Oh, you want to keep doing this video?
I don't know about this video, but I would do another one because I feel like we've done all of the history. We've gone through this one. Like, what's he gonna do? He's gonna do like Ben Shapiro explains the physics of Iron Dome. Like, come on.
Oh, the rest of it is like Iron Dome? Sick.
Like, he literally, that's what I skipped ahead because I got to this. I watched it and was like, I don't understand this. Like, why is it's half over, but we've already got to the present day. So what does he do? And it's just like, it's so boring. And it, like, for one thing, it gets even more boring. But then he literally just goes into like talking about Iron Dome. I don't understand.
I thought he would at least like dignify us with like, super racist diatribes about, fucking Palestinians loving to blow stuff up and living in sewage.
I think that he has a very special gift for taking something and like combining it in like, because for years I never understood his appeal. I really don't, and I still don't by and large. I think of him as like a kind of a wretch, just a fundamentally
3.6
unappealing.
million views.
I know, I don't understand, but here's the thing: if you are a really hateful person or a really ignorant person, everything is a soundbite. Nothing is an idea that connects to the other. There's no line of thought. There's no story. There's no anything. It's just sound bites and sound bites and sound bites about like this pithy quip to respond to this thing that doesn't even make sense. But like if you don't know anything, it sounds real good. It drives me crazy. But I like that. I understand that that's his appeal. That like he's the quip soundbite guy.
I think he makes a lot. I think he makes a lot of people sound or like feel intelligent. Like a lot of stupid people can just like repeat what he's saying.
Yeah, exactly. Because he speaks in like that clippable way. Like you'll remember a thing that he said that one time about it. Like it's very, I mean, it's a talk radio habit. Truthfully, if that was the secret of Rush. In addition to being a provocateur, like a shock jock, it was also that he really, really was able to like make his audience feel like they were both in on something, but also that like they were able to, he was giving them, tools in some sense. Which is why he's like literally in front of a fucking fake chalkboard. Bullshit. Like this is like a dumb guy's idea of how to teach. Insane.
He's the guy that makes you feel confident for the most annoying person on the planet that wants to come across as smart but has no friends and can't comprehend why he has no friends because he's constantly doing shit like this. Okay. Well, Noah, thank you so much for coming on again. I can't believe I had you on for another like 8-hour session where we went through these bitch beer videos. I will have you on again soon for dismantling maybe a Sam Harris one next time. He's even worse.
I Mr. Rationality.
Yeah.
You're mine. You're done. You're cooked.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure, dude. I'll see you.
All right. Bye. That was Noah Kulwin, everybody. I'm very fortunate to be able to have such a bright mind on the broadcast. Come and dismantle these ridiculous propaganda talking points from Ben Shabibo. Entirely ahistorical. It is pretty funny that we've taken like 2 days to get to 20 minutes of his videos. Noah Kulwin has a podcast called Blowback, for those of you who haven't checked it out. Also wonderful. Really cool